Chapter 22. Nanny Sun's shrewd old eyes glanced at the things on the table. She also saw Wang Shi's expression. A trace of satisfaction flashed in her eyes, and a smile appeared on her serious face. She bowed to Yi Li and said, "In that case, I will leave first." Yi Li nodded and said to Qing Shuang, "Send Nanny Sun out for me." Qing Shuang responded. Yun and the other maidservants came forward to take the things. Qing Shuang personally led Nanny Sun and the others out. "Ding Palace, I know. You can leave." In the quiet and somewhat lonely water pavilion, the man in cyan looked at the lake outside the window and said indifferently. A trace of helplessness flashed across Nanny Sun's face because of her seriousness and harshness. She looked at the lonely figure in front of her and wanted to say something but stopped. In the end, she did not say anything and left sadly. It seems that Nanny Sun has a good impression of third Miss Yi. It is not easy to make Nanny Sun speak for her. On the other side, Feng Zhiyao was still wearing flamboyant and gorgeous clothes. He smiled lazily at his close friend in front of him. Mo Xiaoyao turned to look at him. His eyes were calm and gentle. "So what? So what?" Feng Zhiyao sat up and stared at him. Even his lazy voice rose a lot. "Yao, third Miss Yi is your future wife. She will spend the rest of her life with you. Are you really not going to see her? If she is really as good as you say, do you think I will marry her smoothly? Don't forget that she has the Su family behind her." Mo Xiaoyao said calmly. "What do you mean?" Feng Zhiyao frowned. Could it be that he was up to something? Mo Xiaoyao looked down and quietly looked at the hand on the wheelchair armrest. On the day Prince Li's mansion sent the betrothal gifts, old concubine Xian Zhao specially summoned Yi Li. Feng Zhiyao curled his lips disdainfully. Will Mo Jingli regret it? So what if he regretted it? Does he really think that the Ding royal residence and the Su family are playthings that he can manipulate at will? Mo Xiaoyao's deep and gentle eyes flashed with a hint of coldness. Mo Jingli was the one who broke off the engagement first. Back then, there was a reason why the late emperor betrothed Yi Li to Mo Jingli. When Yi Li was born, Yi Wenhua was just a nobleman of the third rank. How could the late emperor choose such a poor concubine for his favorite prince? Naturally, it was for Yi Li's grandfather, the Su family. It was a pity that the Su family had gradually withdrawn from the imperial court over the years, causing most people in and out of the imperial palace to forget how influential the Su family was. If that's the case, why would the emperor only give third young Miss Yi to you? If third young Mistress Yi is really a woman without talent, appearance, or virtue, and has had her marriage annulled, why wouldn't the emperor only give her to me? Mo Xiaoyao asked indifferently. Feng Zhiyao shrugged indifferently. In any case, the brains of the imperial family's people weren't normal. Then do you want to go to Peony Park or not? Do you want to see your fiancé? Mo Xiaoyao turned his head and looked at the lake silently. Feng Zhiyao saw this and secretly nodded his head. Ever since that incident, Yao had become more and more awkward. Yi Li felt a headache as she looked at the table full of things in front of her. The large table was divided into two sides, with a set of clothes and corresponding accessories on each side. On the left side was a set of clothes with a white background and blue flowers. On the snow-like clothes, there were light blue butterflies dancing. The sunlight outside the window shone on the clothes, making people vaguely see butterflies flapping their wings. Jing and Tian'er carefully held the clothes. Tian'er, who was the youngest, said in surprise, "The butterflies aren't embroidered." "It's so beautiful." Qing Xia smiled and said, "This is Keisai silk. It's very expensive. Generally, Keisai silk is extremely gorgeous. Something as simple and elegant as young mistresses is actually even rarer. Also, this silk thread seems to be very unusual." The clothes were as light as a feather in her hands, but they didn't look flimsy at all. Obviously, they weren't made of ordinary material. Qing Shuang looked curiously to the left and then to the right. She tilted her head and looked at Yi Li. "The clothes from Aunt and Prince are very beautiful. Which one would young mistress like to wear? Yili looked at the snow-blue butterfly silk dress her aunt had sent over, then her eyes fell on the brocade box on the right. The box was light blue cloud satin embroidered with a subtle but delicate silver peony pattern. The sleeves and hem of the dress were faintly outlined with an elegant cloud pattern. It was simple and low-key, but at a glance, it made people feel incomparable elegance and comfort. I'll take this one. Help me keep the one that Aunt sent. I'll wear this on Uncle's birthday next month. Yili quickly made a decision. It was necessary to spend some effort on the clothes, but it wasn't necessary to waste too much time. The maidservants hurriedly and carefully put away the white with a blue butterfly dress. They then took out the set of clothes sent by the Ding King's Fu and helped Yili change. After a moment, Yili walked out from behind the screen amidst the maidservants' exclamations. The light blue color was suitable for Yi Li's quiet and elegant temperament, and the delicate silver thread pattern on it made the simple style of the dress not appear monotonous. A kind of low-key luxury, Yi Li lightly praised in her heart. Even though the Ding King's Fu was not as good as before, the gifts sent out were still extraordinary. This is the cloud water satin. Jing Wen, who had been standing at the side, exclaimed. Qing Xia's expression was also a little shocked. The Mandarin duck brocade, cloud water satin, and hibiscus muslin were known as the three treasures of Nanzhao. They were one of the most precious specialties of Nanzhao. And they were not items that were used for trade between the two countries. They were only given as gifts between the two countries every year. As the head of the three treasures, the cloud water satin would not exceed 10 bolts even in the palace every year. Yili smiled and glanced at Jing Wen. You have good eyesight. Jing Wen's expression changed slightly and she forced a smile. This servant has seen it once at 4th Young Miss Place. It was given to 4th Young Miss by Zhao Yinyang. She had indeed seen it at 4th Young Miss Place. However, it was not a piece of clothing, but a piece of silk. Although the cloud water satin was called satin, it was different from the luxurious and heavy satin of ordinary satin. Instead, it was soft and elegant. If one didn't look at the hidden gorgeous pattern closely, one wouldn't be able to tell that it was cloud water satin. 4th Young Miss was given a cloud water satin by Yi Zhaoyi last year. However, it was not enough to make clothes. Yi Ying was also reluctant to part with it and had people carefully put it away. Ever since that day, Jing Wen acted on her own initiative and introduced the past into Qing Yi Xian without any notice. Although Yili did not say anything, Jing Wen had been very careful for fear that 3rd Young Miss would find an excuse to punish her. But she didn't expect that this moment of surprise would attract Yili's attention. Yili nodded and no longer paid attention to the somewhat nervous Jing Wen. She turned and sat in front of the bronze mirror. Qing Xia and Qing Shuang held the ornaments sent by the Ding King's Fu and chose suitable ones to do her hair. Jing Wen stood quietly in a corner and looked at the servants who were busy in an orderly manner. She was somewhat embarrassed and unwilling. Her gaze fell on the ornament box that was casually placed on the table. She quickly lowered her head and didn't dare to look again. However, she didn't know that Yili was sitting in front of the bronze mirror and saw her unconcealed expression. Chapter 23. Qing Shuang deftly inserted the last jade hairpin into her hair and smiled with satisfaction. Miss, you will make all the noble ladies in the capital pale in comparison today. What nonsense are you talking about? If others hear you, they will laugh themselves to death. Yili glanced at the confident Qing Shuang and scolded her softly. Qing Shuang winked playfully and smiled. In Qing Shuang's eyes, Miss is the most beautiful woman in the world. It doesn't matter if she is beautiful or not, as long as she is passable. When everything was ready, Yi Li stood up and said, "Let's go, don't be late." Qing Shuang and Qing Xia quickly followed behind Yi Li. Qing Shuang did not forget to mutter, "I wonder if Prince Ding will come to the 100-Flower Festival." Qing Xia glanced at Yi Li who was walking in front and whispered, "The 100-Flower Festival is a gathering of the noble ladies in the capital. Although some famous people are invited every year, Prince Ding has never attended." At the entrance of the Yi residence. Before Yi Li could even step out of the door, she saw Yi Ying walking over leisurely under the escort of her maidservants. Behind her were Yi Lin and Yi Shan, who had joyful expressions on their faces. It seemed that the issue of the invitation to the 100-Flower Festival had been resolved. Yi Li was not familiar with these two sisters, so even if they occasionally tried to make things difficult for her to please Wang Shi, she did not want to argue with them as long as they did not really offend her. After all, she had never fulfilled her responsibility as an elder sister. Naturally, she could not count on them to treat her as a younger sister. When they saw Yi Li, Yi Lin and Yi Shan reluctantly went forward to greet her. "Hello, third sister." Yi Li nodded. "Fourth sister, fifth sister, sixth sister." Yi Ying was wearing a snow-white wide-sleeved gown, dotted with pink cherry blossom petals. Her black hair was tied up in a simple bun, and there was a golden butterfly buyao in her hair. When she moved, the delicate butterfly wings trembled slightly. It was very lifelike. Yi Ying was undoubtedly a young girl who was very good at dressing herself up. In fact, the Yi family's sisters were not bad-looking, but Yi Lin and Yi Shan, who were also dressed up well, became a foil in front of Yi Ying. Looking at the pink cherry blossom makeup between her eyebrows, it made her seem as if she was an immortal. She really lived up to her reputation as the #1 beauty in the capital. While Yi Li was sizing up Yi Ying was also sizing up her third sister, whom she and her mother disliked. Yi Li had never attended any gatherings in the capital and did not seem to be good at dressing up. Yi Ying originally did not pay much attention to her. However, when she saw Yi Li in a light green dress from afar, it confirmed her thoughts. Although Yi Li didn't wear the clothes sent by her mother, it didn't mean that she could take care of herself better. However, when she walked closer, Yi Ying discovered that Yi Li's outfit was not as inconspicuous as she thought. The light green dress looked simple and unadorned, but under the sunlight, there was a faint flow of magnificent dark patterns and the silver-embroidered peony pattern, which made the young girl in front of her give off a reserved and elegant noble aura. Also, the 2 jade magnolia hairpins in her hair were this month's new products from Fenghuo Lu. She had long taken a fancy to it, but her mother never agreed to buy it. She didn't expect to see it in Yi Li's clothes. Looking at Yi Li's low-key yet elegant, simple yet noble outfit, Yi Ying, who was originally faintly proud of her own makeup, couldn't wait to turn around and tear this dress up. Thinking about 2 days ago when she heard that the Ding Palace sent someone to send something to Yi Li, Yi Ying felt even more depressed. Ever since she got engaged with Li Wang had never sent her anything. Since everyone is here, let's set off. It's not good to be late. Yi Li retracted her gaze and said to her 3 younger sisters. There were already 3 carriages parked outside the door. The one in front was Yi Li's, followed by Yi Ying's. Yi Shan and Yi Lin, who were concubines' daughters, could only share one carriage. The youngest, Yi Shan, looked at the red sandalwood carriage and the pearwood carriage with light muslin curtains that belonged to Yi Ying. Then, she looked at the carriage that she and Yi Shan shared and pouted her lips. Looking at Yi Ying and Yi Li who boarded the carriage, Yi Shan rolled her eyes and ran towards Yi Li, third sister, "Can Shan sit with you?" Yi Li, who had already boarded the carriage, regained her senses and looked at Yi Shan who had a naive and eager face. She nodded indifferently, "Come on up." Yi Shan hurriedly stepped on the brocade stool and boarded the carriage happily. Yi Ying, who was behind them, obviously heard their conversation. She lifted a corner of the muslin curtain slightly and smiled at Yi Lin who was still standing at the side. "Since that's the case, fifth sister, you can sit with me. It'll save me from being bored." Yi Lin hurriedly thanked Yi Ying gratefully and boarded Yi Ying's carriage. The carriage moved slowly and steadily towards Peony Park. Yi Li sat in the carriage and looked at the obvious annoyance on Yi Shan's face that could not be concealed. She found it funny. She must be regretting her actions just now because she might have angered Yi Ying. Girls in this era thought too much. Yi Shan would only turn 13 in a few months. Thinking back to her previous life, when she was 12 years old, she was forced to memorize countless military books. In reality, she was still a little kid who did not know anything. It was good enough that she could occasionally play petty tricks with her grandfather or cousins. How could she think of these scheming thoughts? This was just a strategy for their survival, so Yili did not want to deliberately make things difficult for this girl who was upset. Being too competitive is not a good thing. Yili handed the book to Qing Shuang and looked at Yi Shan with interest. Yi Shan's expression kept changing. She was still young and could not hide her emotions and thoughts most of the time. You? What nonsense are you talking about? I'm not. Yi Shan's tender face was flushed. She bit her lip and glared at Yi Li. Is there a big difference between sitting in my carriage and sitting in your own carriage? Yi Li asked indifferently. Yi Shan glared at her fiercely. Her eyes were filled with resentment, but they quickly turned into depression. Yes, even if you are not favored, you are still the legitimate daughter. Even if Prince Li broke off the engagement, you can still marry Prince Ding and be his legitimate wife. No matter how smart I am, no matter how much father and grandmother like me, I will always be a concubine's daughter. In the future, if I don't marry someone else, I will marry a concubine's son and be his wife. Yi Li looked speechlessly at the angry girl in front of her. She was already thinking about these things at the age of 12. Even after so many years, she was still not used to it. Moreover, this girl's words were not pleasant to hear. It's not a good habit to hurt people with your words. Humph. Yi Li was too lazy to argue with her. It was only when they were about to reach their destination that she muttered to herself, if one's identity can't be changed, then it's better to live a better life than to ask for things that you can't achieve. Yi Shan was stunned. It took her a while to react. She glared at Yi Li angrily and said, "Are you warning me not to dream of good things?" Yi Li felt choked. After a while, she said, "I'm saying that you are still young. You can think about it slowly. Also, it seems that we should get off the carriage." Chapter 24. Yi Li shrugged her shoulders in amusement when she saw Yi Shan rushing to get off the carriage with a sullen face. Qing Shuang said with a gloomy face, "Miss, why do you care about sixth miss? She always makes fun of you. You really don't know how to appreciate kindness." Yi Li patted her hand and lifted the curtain. She smiled and said, "She's still a child. Everyone has their own means of survival. As long as she doesn't really harm me, why would I care about a child?" Peony Park was the largest peony viewing spot in the capital city and even the entire Dechu state. Every year, people from all over the country and even other countries would travel thousands of miles just to enjoy the beauty of peonies. April was the season of peonies. One could smell the faint fragrance of flowers in the air from afar. The minister's mansion had become famous in the capital city recently. One daughter was conferred the title of Jiaoyi and was pregnant with the emperor's child. Two daughters were the future Princess Li and Princess Ding. So when the carriage arrived at the gate, it attracted a lot of attention. While people were admiring the beauty of the most beautiful woman in the capital city, they were more sympathetic. They looked at the carriage in front of them. So when Yi Shan came out of the carriage, the people who pretended to be watching inadvertently were stunned. When they came back to their senses, they saw a pretty girl dressed as a maid coming out of the carriage. Then, they lifted the curtain and saw a quiet girl with a beautiful face coming out of the carriage. Was this the future Princess Ding? They didn't know whether to be surprised or disappointed. This third Miss Yi was obviously not as ugly and clumsy as they had imagined. Her calm and elegant demeanor showed that she had received a very good upbringing. This made people think of the third Miss Yi's maternal ancestors, the century-old Su family that was passed down through generations of scholars. Looking at fourth Miss Yi, who was as delicate and helpless as a fairy, it was obvious that third Miss Yi was more suitable to be the mistress of the family because she was beautiful, graceful, and dignified. Maybe it was because of jealousy of Yi Ying. Many of the girls present had a trace of doubt about the taste of Prince Li, whom they admired. At the same time, they were a little more sure of themselves. Sure enough, the peony park was filled with blooming flowers and colorful butterflies, and the young girls who were reluctant to part with it added a bit of brilliance to this beauty. The young girls were walking in groups of twos and threes with their close friends. They were laughing and talking in low voices. It was a scene of prosperity and peace. When Yili and her group arrived at the venue in the center of Peony Park, many people had already arrived. Some of the girls were playing the zither, some were playing chess, some were painting, and some were writing poems. The maids of the princess residence shuttled back and forth, perfectly serving these noble ladies. As soon as Yiying approached, someone immediately greeted her. A few girls of the same age came up to greet her. Obviously, they had a good relationship with Yiying. The others also smiled and welcomed Yiying. You're finally here. We haven't seen each other for a long time ever since you got engaged to His Highness King Li. A young girl dressed in colorful clothes happily pulled Yiying's arm and smiled. Yiying smiled, her beautiful face blushing. Mother asked me to stay at home. I miss everyone too. After everyone was busy congratulating Yiying, the young girl dressed in colorful clothes asked, this is third Miss Yi? I am Yi Li, greetings, ladies. Yi Li smiled. The young girls exchanged glances. They only felt that third Miss Yi was not as bad as the rumors said. Moreover, she was the future princess consort of Dingwa, the true legitimate daughter of the minister's residence, and the granddaughter of Old Master Su. Soon, someone expressed goodwill to Yi Li. Hello, Miss Yi. I am Imperial Censor Qin's second daughter, Qin Zheng. I am Murong Ting, the daughter of General Yang Wei. Humph. I was wondering who it was. So it's third Miss Yi, whose engagement was broken off by brother Jingli. In the peaceful atmosphere, there were always one or two discordant voices. Everyone turned around and saw a young girl with gorgeous makeup walking over, surrounded by a crowd. Yi Li thought for a moment and understood the identity of the young girl in front of her. She was the daughter of the current emperor's cousin, Princess Zhaoren, and Princess Zhaoyang's niece, Princess Ronghua. Although Yi Li was not familiar with the noble ladies in the capital, her uncle had asked her aunt to send her information about all the noble families in the capital. Among them, there were a few that needed special attention. This Princess Ronghua happened to be one of them. Princess Ronghua is impatient. Be careful, Miss Yi. Suddenly, someone beside Yi Li whispered. Yi Li looked up and saw Imperial Censor Qin's daughter, Qin Zheng, smiling kindly at her. Yi Li nodded gratefully. Qin Zheng also smiled back. Greetings, Princess. Everyone present quickly went forward to greet Princess Ronghua. Princess Ronghua snorted and walked to Yi Li. She stared at her for a long time and then said proudly, You are Yi Li. Yi Li nodded, Yes, Princess. She didn't know why, but Yi Li was keenly aware of Princess Ronghua's hostility towards her. Yi Li had never seen Princess Ronghua before, so she couldn't understand where this princess's hostility came from. I heard that you knew you were ugly and didn't dare to come out. How come you couldn't wait to run out after being abandoned by brother Jingli? Don't you feel embarrassed? Princess Ronghua's exquisite makeup was full of disdain. When the noble ladies standing by heard her words, they also whispered. Yi Li's eyes flashed with a faint coldness, but her eyes didn't avoid the noble and arrogant young girl in front of her. Even if Yi Li had always boasted of being calm, she couldn't help but admit that this girl was really too unlikable. Princess, thank you for your concern. Yi Li has been out for so long and hasn't scared anyone. Perhaps I underestimated myself too much in the past. Yi Li's tone was soft, but there was no weakness or avoidance. As for His Highness Prince Li, Yi Li is indeed not good enough for him. His Majesty is really wise to choose someone else for His Highness Prince Li. Princess Ronghua didn't expect Yi Li to say such things. She was stunned and said disdainfully, It's good that you know yourself. Yi Ying quickly came forward and smiled apologetically. Ronghua, sister has never attended a gathering in the capital. If I have offended you, please don't blame me. Yi Ying obviously wanted to be a good sister who helped her sister out in front of everyone. But Princess Ronghua didn't want to give her face. She waved Yi Ying's hand away and glanced at Yi Ying with disgust. She is a good-for-nothing, and you are even worse. Whether I blame you or not, is it up to you? Yi Ying's perfect smile suddenly froze on her face, and her hand froze as if she forgot to take it back. Ronghua, you, Princess Ronghua raised her chin proudly and looked at Yi Ying with disgust. How dare you call me by my name? Looking at the obvious anger, disgust, and jealousy in Princess Ronghua's eyes when she stared at Yi Ying, Yi Li had a little idea. If Princess Ronghua was rude to her, then she was blatantly rejecting and humiliating Yi Ying. It must have something to do with His Highness Prince Li, who was famous in the capital. Yi Li shook her head in her heart. Although she didn't have any feelings for this sister, she didn't think Prince Li and Princess Ronghua would be a good match. There was no benefit in marrying close relatives. Chapter 25. Yi Ying looked at Commandery Princess Ronghua with grievance. Her lips moved as if she wanted to say something. Yi Li stepped forward and held her hand. She looked back at Commandery Princess Ronghua and said, I heard that you have a good relationship with my sister. My sister offended you just now. As her elder sister, I was negligent in teaching her. Please forgive her. Commandery Princess Ronghua raised her eyebrows. Aren't you afraid that I will punish you? Or do you want to humiliate yourself like Yi Ying? Yi Li smiled. Commandery Princess, you are graceful and magnanimous. You won't be angry over such a trivial matter. When I go back, Yi Li will tell my father and mother. Then I will go to the princess's mansion to ask for forgiveness. So don't make trouble now. Commandery Princess Ronghua stared at Yi Li for a long time and said thoughtfully, You are better than Yi Ying. Brother Jingli doesn't have good taste. Obviously feeling Yi Ying's stiff wrist, Yi Li couldn't help but feel speechless. Commandery Princess Ronghua, will you die if you don't provoke me? Commandery Princess, you are flattering me. Prince Li's taste and reputation have always been praised. Finally, Commandery Princess Ronghua snorted heavily and left with a large group of people. She left behind a sympathetic and worried look. It was not a good thing to offend this spoiled princess. Fourth sister, are you okay? Seeing Commandery Princess Ronghua go away, Yi Shan and Yi Lin hurried to ask with concern. Several other girls who had a good relationship with Yi Ying also surrounded Yi Ying. Yi Ying had offended the princess's mansion and Commandery Princess Ronghua. Don't forget that she was the future Princess Li. Prince Li was deeply favored by the Emperor and the Empress Dowager. Princess Li's status was much higher than Commandery Princess Ronghua's. Commandery Princess Ronghua has a bad temper. Don't mind her. A soft and elegant voice whispered to Yi Li. Yi Li raised her head and looked at the scholarly lady in front of her. She smiled calmly and said, I'm fine. Thank you for your reminder, Miss Qin. Qin Jing also smiled generously and said, You're welcome. My mother and Madame Su are good friends. Madame Su often mentions you. I've wanted to meet you for a long time, but unfortunately, you rarely attend gatherings, so I never got the chance to meet you. Yi Li remembered that Miss Qin's father, Imperial Censor Qin, seemed to be a disciple of her maternal grandfather, Sir Qingyun. Most importantly, Qin Zheng and her second cousin, Su Qingze, seemed to be engaged before they were born. No wonder cousin said that second cousin was going to stay in the capital for a long time. Second cousin was already 19 years old, so it was time for him to get married. Thinking of this, Yi Li's smile became more sincere. Just call me by my name. I didn't like to go out in the past. Fortunately, I didn't miss out on a good friend like you. But, we'll get to know each other better in the future, right? Qin Zheng clearly understood what she was referring to. She blushed and glared at her. I'm half a year older than you. You can call me sister. Let me introduce you to a few good friends. Thus, Yi Li and Yi Ying were pulled to two sides. Qin Zheng introduced Yi Li to her good friends. Unsurprisingly, these girls had taken the initiative to greet Yi Li. After discovering that Yi Li was not as bad as the rumors said, and was instead an elegant and well-spoken young lady, everyone happily accepted this new friend. Sitting together with her new friends, Yi Li began to talk about some interesting things that happened in the boudoir in the capital. She realized that these girls were not as boring as she originally thought. Indeed, the young ladies carefully nurtured by the aristocratic families would most likely become the matriarchs of these aristocratic families in the future. Naturally, they were all intelligent women with both talent and ability, and not those love-struck women who lived or died for love as written in the storybooks. Miss Yi, it's better if you stay away from your younger sister. Muon Ting had obviously inherited her father's forthright personality. She glanced at Yi Ying, who was practicing with someone not far away, and said, "Don't worry." Yi Li raised her eyebrows and said, "What do you mean?" Muon Ting waved her hand and said, "Yi Ying's reputation is not very good right now. I heard that Zhaoyang royal princess did not want to send an invitation to her at all. Who knows how she persuaded the virtuous Zhaoyang royal princess to personally speak on her behalf. Zhaoyang royal princess is an upright person and hates those who do not follow the rules. If you get too close to her, Zhaoyang royal princess might take her anger out on you." Yi Li knew that Yi Ying's reputation was not very good now, but she was still a little surprised that it was bad to this extent. She thought that the requirements for women in this era were not as strict as in the ancient times of her previous life. If it was a normal betrothal, it would be fine. Even if someone was jealous, it would not be good to say anything. Another young lady from Duquo's mansion frowned and said, "She's already intimate with her future brother-in-law before she's even married. How can a sister like that stand?" Previously, Princess Ronghua and Yi Ying had the best relationship, but after the betrothal, Princess Ronghua and Yi Ying fell out. Muon Ting said disdainfully, "I heard that Prince Li and Yi Ying met mostly because of Princess Ronghua." Princess Ronghua probably felt that she was being used by Yi Ying. Qin Zheng frowned and said, "Alright, why are you saying this in front of Li Er?" The two then remembered that Yi Li was the most direct victim of this matter. Princess Consort Li, who was envied by all the noble ladies in the capital, had now become Princess Consort Ding, who was pitied by everyone. They could not help but look apologetically at Yi Li, not knowing how to apologize for a moment. Yi Li covered her mouth and smiled, saying, "It's not a big deal. I'm just saying it. You don't have to be so worried." Qin Zheng looked at her worriedly and said, "Li, you." Yi Li waved her hand and said, "It's difficult to follow imperial orders. Since it's already like this, of course we have to accept reality. Isn't it useless to mourn and blame ourselves? Besides, Prince Ding was an extremely outstanding person before the incident. I haven't heard of him having a bad temper all these years. He shouldn't be hard to get along with." The originally heavy topic was said by Yi Li with an indifferent attitude, and it instantly became much more relaxed. The four of them chatted for a while before the maids of the Princess Fu came to invite the young misses to the banquet. The four of them then stood up and left together. After everyone left, the noisy garden became much quieter. Only the laughter of the young girls could be heard in the distance. A blue figure came out from behind the rockery. The thin figure was sitting in a wheelchair as he looked in the direction the young girls had left. A deep look flashed in his gentle and cold eyes. "The bright sun eldest princess has arrived." On the lush grass of the peony garden, there were all kinds of delicacies and fresh fruits placed on the neatly arranged tables. The young misses in bright and beautiful clothes were sitting in order as they softly chatted. Hearing the arrival of the eldest princess, they quickly stood up and bowed, "Greetings to the eldest princess." The bright sun eldest princess was wearing an elegant palace dress. Although she was close to 40 years old, her slightly cold face was still well maintained. A pair of beautiful eyebrows were slightly raised. Obviously, the temper of the eldest princess was not a gentle person. Princess Ronghua obediently followed the eldest princess, which was completely different from the domineering appearance she had seen in the courtyard before. Walking with her was a beautiful young girl in brocade clothes, who curiously looked at the young misses around with a smile. However, Yi Li couldn't guess the identity of this young girl even after searching through her memory, so she simply didn't think about it. Chapter 26. No need for formalities, please sit down. Everyone stood up and thanked her again, then sat down. Zhaoyang elder princess said, "Today's event is a gathering of the daughters of the capital. You don't have to be too restrained, just do whatever you want." Although Elder Princess said so, there were not many who dared to be casual. Princess Ronghua sat next to Elder Princess, holding her arm and acting like a spoiled child. Elder Princess's cold face softened a little. Obviously, Elder Princess, who had no children, was very fond of this little niece. Who is the girl next to Elder Princess? She is so beautiful. The noble maidens looked curiously at the beautiful girl beside the eldest princess, whispering and exchanging their opinions with their good friends. Some of them even looked at Yi Ying vaguely. Yi Ying's smile was a little forced. The girl sitting on the right side of Zhaoyang Elder Princess was obviously not inferior to Princess Ronghua. And her appearance was far better than Princess Ronghua. Yi Ying claimed to be the most beautiful girl in the capital, but the girl in the brocade dress was delicate and bright. Unlike Yi Ying's delicate and slender appearance, she was more attractive. A beautiful woman would always notice a woman more beautiful than herself first. Huh, who is that girl? Yi Ying's title as the most beautiful girl in the capital is gone. Murong Ting covered her mouth with her sleeve and laughed. Hua Tianxiang looked at her and smiled. She is the niece of Zhaoyang Princess's husband. Zhaoyang Princess's husband? Isn't that? Qin Zheng was also a little surprised. She hesitated and said, which princess of Nanzhao Kingdom? Zhaoyang Elder Princess's husband was a hostage from Nanzhao Kingdom to Dechu State. It was said that Zhaoyang Elder Princess and her husband loved each other and would only marry him. The late emperor had no choice but to marry his most beloved sister to a hostage. After the marriage, the husband and the princess were deeply in love with each other. Who knew that the husband would die of illness in less than 3 years? Elder Princess swore in front of the late emperor that she would not remarry and would keep her chastity for the rest of her life. Hearing this, Yi Li also looked at Hua Tianxiang curiously. Hua Tianxiang was the daughter of the Duke of Hua and the niece of the Empress, so it was not surprising that she knew some things that others did not. Hua Tianxiang glanced at the eldest princess and the beautiful girl and shook her head. That's the youngest daughter of the current Nanzhao king, the #1 beauty of Nanzhao, Princess Xixia. I heard that Nanzhao produces beauties. This Princess Xixia is indeed extraordinary. Hua Tianxiang blinked and looked at Yi Li. She wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Yi Li raised her eyebrows and looked at her with a smile. What can't you say? Hua Tianxiang smiled. Although this is the first time we've met, I think you're a wonderful person. There's no harm in telling you. This Princess Xixia, apparently, she'll be living in our Dechu state for a long time. Permanent residence? Murong Ting was no longer interested in watching the song and dance. She looked at Hua Tianxiang in confusion and said, this Princess Xixia seems to be about the same age as us. If she were to stay for a long time, wouldn't that mean that Princess Xixia planned to marry into the Dechu state? The marriage between the two countries was a major event. Why was there no news of it outside? Hua Tianxiang coughed softly. She covered her mouth and said in a low voice, Princess Xixia came to the Dechu state by herself. Do you still remember that last year, His Highness Prince Li went to Nanzhao? You're saying? Murong Ting was so shocked that she almost couldn't control her voice. Qin Zheng secretly pinched her to calm her down. Seeing that the people at the two tables couldn't help but look over, she quickly pretended to be dignified and calmly took a sip of the 100-flower fruit wine in front of her. Seeing that no one was paying attention to her, Murong Ting smiled apologetically at the other three. Hua Tianxiang and Qin Zheng obviously knew her personality very well, and they smiled without care. Murong Ting frowned. She looked at Yi Li and said, although I shouldn't say this, I still want to say it. Perhaps it really isn't a bad thing to discuss the marriage with Prince Li. Yi Li sipped the faint fruit wine in her cup and agreed with a smile. You're right. Who do you think will be the judges of the 100-Flower Festival this year? Hua Tianxiang asked. Yi Li only had a general idea of the process of the 100-Flower Festival. She only thought of it as a gathering for the capital's noble ladies to socialize. She shook her head indifferently. Hua Tianxiang angrily poked her with a finger. This is your first time participating in the 100-Flower Festival. No matter what, you have to go on stage and show off your skills. Otherwise, those arrogant fellows will look down on you. Yili blinked her eyes and looked at the dancers on the stage. You want me to go up and sing and dance? I'll scare people. I don't know how to dance. Moreover, she wasn't someone who wanted to show off. There weren't any celebrity talent shows these days. Qin Zheng explained softly, most noble ladies won't choose to sing and dance. However, the 4 arts, poetry, and songs all have to be competed. Every year, the top 3 winners will receive a very precious prize. Prize? You're all participating? Murong Ting said embarrassedly, other than me, Zheng Er and Tianxiang are both very strong. Last year, Zheng Er won first place in poetry, calligraphy, and painting. Last year, Tianxiang was first in chess and third in zither. Last year's first place was your 4th sister, the future princess consort Li. She was first in zither and dance, and 5th in poetry. Yili glanced at Yi Ying, who was sitting across a table and talking to someone. She smiled and said, I know this. But I didn't know that Zheng Er and Miss Hua are both rare talented ladies. Hua Tianxiang waved her hand. Madame Yi was the most talented lady in the capital. This year, Zheng Er and I won't be participating. We'll be depending on you. Yili was helpless. I'm really not good at these things. Qin Zheng held her hand and smiled. This year, Yi Ying will definitely participate. Li Er can't lose to her. Hua Tianxiang was also in high spirits. That's right. Yili must avenge me. Last year, I worked so hard, but I lost to Yi Ying. So embarrassing. Murong Ting didn't forget to join in the fun. She looked at her eagerly. In martial arts, I can take first place every year. Unfortunately, no one can compete with me. Li, you have to work hard. Yili didn't know whether to laugh or cry at these new people she met. She really wasn't good at these things. Although she had been taught by her mother since childhood, she knew some things. However, compared to those who had put in a lot of effort into training, he was nowhere near as good as them. Take Yi Ying's dance for example. Although she didn't see it, it was said that there were 5 or 6 dance masters who were specially hired for Yi Ying. Every dance was specially choreographed, and Yi Ying had indeed put in a lot of effort in this aspect. As for her, ever since her mother passed away and she regained the memories of her previous life, her interest in these things had decreased by more than 10%. Moreover, Madame Wang wouldn't specially hire good masters to teach her. This year, I'm afraid you have to participate even if you don't want to. Murong Ting ate the exquisite snacks on the table as she said, the winner of the 100-Flower Festival has the right to choose anyone present to spar with. Believe me, if it weren't for the fact that you didn't go out all these years, I'm afraid the person who gets the most challenges every year would be you. In the past, she was Prince Li's fiancée. Now, she was the future Princess Ding. In the eyes of many people, Yi Li's life was so good that it made people jealous. They were probably waiting for her to make a fool of herself. Chapter 27. Hurry up and eat something. When it officially starts, you probably won't have a chance to eat anything today. Hua Tianxiang reminded. Yi Li speechlessly looked at the dishes in front of her. She felt like she had been dawdling for 2 hours, but the 100-Flower Festival still hadn't started. Although Yi Li felt it was very boring, since the 100-Flower Festival was the most important festival for the young ladies of the Dechu state, it naturally had its own unique highlights. When the banquet was over, the Sunshine eldest princess ordered people to bring up the prizes for the young ladies that won the 100-Flower Festival. Seeing the previously reserved and elegant young ladies all reveal looks of desire, Yi Li was a bit surprised and understood. Every single one of the girls present was from a prestigious family, and they had seen countless treasures since they were young. Treasures that could move them naturally wouldn't be ordinary. More importantly, winning these prizes would bring them fame. Whether it was in their boudoir or when they married into their in-laws' families, it would be enough for them to look down on their peers. When the prizes appeared on the eldest princess' left and right sides, the young ladies' hearts couldn't stop beating. The judges invited by the eldest princess this year were all very important people. Although she only recognized the cold-faced Prince Li, Mo Jingli, among the 6 men and 1 woman seated around the Princess Royal's table, she didn't know him. There was also the man in embroidered clothes with a coquettish smile that mysteriously smiled at her. Although it was only for a moment, Yi Li was certain that she didn't see it. That man had indeed smiled at her, and that smile wasn't just a normal polite smile. "Who is the one wearing red clothes?" Yi Li whispered into Qin Zhang's ear. Only one of the 7 people was wearing red clothes. Qin Zhang naturally knew who she was talking about. She covered her mouth and whispered, "That is the 3rd young master of the Feng family, Feng Xiao. It's said that his natural disposition is dissolute and he was born of a concubine, so he isn't liked by the Feng family head. There were rumors 2 years ago that the Feng family head kicked him out of the Feng family. However, his zither skills are indeed the best in the capital." Seeing them whispering to each other, Mu Rongting also came over and said with a smile, "The eldest princess has really put in a lot of effort this year, actually inviting so many famous people." Hua Tianxiang looked at the front with a dignified expression, but she didn't stop talking. The prizes this year are also very generous. The beauty retaining pearl, the purple phoenix hairpin, and the snow melody zither bestowed by the late emperor. If it weren't for the fact that my skills aren't as good as Yi Ying's, I would have given it a try. Hua Tianxiang admired the snow guqin in front of her with some regret. It was ranked 3rd among the 5 most famous zither in the world. It was a treasure that every zither lover dreamed of. Yi Li felt even more regretful. "I haven't touched a piano in years." The 4 of them looked at each other and shrugged helplessly, admiring the prizes and people on the stage. Qin Zheng continued to introduce the people present to Yi Li in a low voice. "Those on the stage, that old mister is the head of the Imperial College, old Darren Suzhou. He is also the teacher of the current emperor. If it weren't for the eldest princess, I'm afraid we wouldn't have been able to invite him. The other top scorers are the current assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel, Mo Jian. The heir of Marquis Muyang, Mu Yang. The eldest son of the northern general's estate, Ling Qingyu." Yi Li's gaze swept over the people Qin Zheng mentioned and memorized them one by one. Who is that woman? Although she never felt that Yi Ying's beauty was truly breathtaking, Yi Li had always admitted that Yi Ying was beautiful enough. But when she came out today, she found that Yi Ying's title as the most beautiful woman in the capital seemed to be shaky. Not to mention Princess Xixia from the Nanzhao Kingdom, Hua Tianxiang's appearance was enough to be compared with Yi Ying's. Qin Zheng was beautiful, but her graceful and elegant temperament from a scholarly family was not comparable to Yi Ying's lovely and moving temperament. There were also several women at the banquet who were extremely outstanding. If it was only these slight differences, how could Yi Ying have firmly held the title of the most beautiful woman in the capital for the past few years? Looking at the woman sitting on the stage, her beautiful face had a bit of charm. Even sitting between 2 men, she was still calm and composed. It was a charm that completely disagreed with the ladies of noble families. Qin Zheng's expression was a bit strange, and she paused for a moment before saying, "That is Miss Yaoji from Qingqing district. She's known for being a master of both the zither and dance. Compared to her, Yi Ying's dance is not worth watching at all. Also, she has a good relationship with Marquis Muyang's heir and young master Feng San." Qin Zheng said a bit awkwardly, but Yi Li understood the woman's identity. Seeing her sitting between Marquis Muyang's heir and young master Feng San with bright eyes and a natural smile, she only felt that this girl was a strange woman. While the 4 of them were talking and laughing, the eldest princess announced the official start of the 100-Flower Festival. Yi Li was originally a bit curious about how to compete in the zither, chess, calligraphy, painting, poetry, singing, and dancing events at the same time. But it was clear that everyone was very clear about the process of the competition. The tables with brushes, ink, paper, and inkstones were placed at the edge of the venue, and the ladies who were interested in participating in calligraphy, painting, and poetry came forward. The maids brought up all kinds of musical instruments and stood at the 2 sides of the front of the venue, leaving the empty space in the center for the woman who would be praising the dance. Yili couldn't help but want to praise the organizer of the banquet. It was indeed a very humane setting. There were no hard and fast rules about which events each person had to perform. After all, not everyone was proficient in the zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting. It also avoided the possibility of many people making a fool of themselves. Beside Zhaoyang, eldest princess, Princess Xixia and Princess Ronghua stood up at the same time, but Princess Ronghua walked to the place with the brushes, ink, paper, and inkstones, while Princess Xixia walked to the center of the venue. Obviously, she planned to perform a dance. Yi Ying walked to the place with the zither on the side. Her jade-like fingers lightly plucked, and a pleasant melody flowed out from her fingers. It seems that Princess Xixia is really going to compete with Yi Ying. Murong Ting smiled. Who in the capital didn't know that Yi Ying was the best at dancing? This Princess Xixia chose to dance as soon as the competition started, clearly wanting to show off her strength to Yi Ying. Hua Tianxiang admired Princess Xixia's graceful dance, and praised, "The people of Nanzhao are good at singing and dancing, not to mention the number one beauty, Princess Xixia." It seems that today, Princess Xixia is going to outshine all the other beauties. Princess Xixia's dance was passionate and elegant. It didn't lack the unrestrained enthusiasm of a foreign nation, but it didn't lose the grace of the Dechu state. In comparison, Yi Ying, who hadn't danced yet, seemed a bit inferior in terms of clothing. Murong Ting also agreed, nodding and smiling, "I think that in terms of dancing, only Yaoji can beat Princess Xixia. In this dance, Yi Ying is going to lose this year." Yi Ying isn't an ordinary person either. Seeing Princess Xixia's strength, she can still be so calm. Qin Zheng reminded. Hua Tianxiang smiled, "If she doesn't have this bit of skill, Yi Ying won't have the face to come out. She's destined to lose the dance, so her zither skills naturally have to be steady no matter what." Yili frowned, "I'm afraid that Princess Xixia came prepared." Although she was no longer a sniper in this life, it didn't affect her eyesight. Yili didn't miss the sneer that flashed through Princess Xixia's eyes when she swept over Yi Ying. Murong Ting was speechless. "Don't tell me that this Princess Xixia's zither skills are better than Yi Ying's." Chapter 28. Hua Tianxiang shook her head and said, "If that's the case, Princess Xixia should play the guqin first before dancing. Dancing consumes a lot of energy. Playing the guqin after dancing will affect your performance. Listen to Yi Ying's guqin." The originally melodious and mellow sound of the zither suddenly changed direction, and the music became urgent and passionate. Princess Xixia's graceful figure moved even faster. In the center of the field, her clothes flew like a gust of wind, and hundreds of flowers bloomed. Clearly, Yi Ying had probably noticed this as well, or perhaps she had sensed that Princess Xixia's strength made her feel threatened. Everyone in the stands obviously noticed the change. Zhaoyang royal princess frowned, and her gaze on Yi Ying was somewhat cold. Yaoji, who was sitting elegantly and admiring Princess Xixia's dance, suddenly giggled. She turned her head and smiled at Imo Jingli, who had a serious expression. "Your Highness Li Wang, the future Li Wangfei is indeed extraordinary. Yaoji admires you." Imo Jingli's face was cold. He didn't even look at Yaoji. He just frowned. In his eyes, Yaoji, who came from a dance troupe, was not worthy of speaking to him. Naturally, he didn't pay attention to Yaoji's words. Yaoji didn't care about his disregard. Her beautiful eyes moved and she smiled sweetly. The number one beauty of the capital lives up to her reputation. But she lacks hospitality. Yaoji's voice wasn't loud, but Yi Ying was sitting at the place closest to the stands. Yaoji's words passed into Yi Ying's ears. Su Zhe, the Imperial College's principal, who hadn't said anything, also snorted. If Yi Ying didn't need to care about Yaoji's words, Su Zhe's attitude made Yi Ying's heart tremble. Her smooth fingering paused. Although she quickly reacted, Feng Xiao, who was sitting next to Yaoji, gradually frowned. He smiled faintly and said, "I originally thought that after a year, Li Wangfei's guqin skills would have improved. I didn't expect." Yi naturally couldn't hear what the people in front were saying. Although Yi was proficient in lip reading, she didn't plan on sharing it with others. Therefore, what Qin Zheng and the others saw was that Yi Ying's expression was even uglier than Princess Xixia's, who had just been schemed against during the dance. Princess Xixia ended the scene with a perfect posture. She glared fiercely at Yi Ying, then turned around and returned to the side of Zhaoyang, eldest princess. The fragrant sweat on her forehead also showed that she was not as relaxed as she appeared. After all, Yi Ying's song was too different from the sudden turn before and after. She was unprepared and did not make a fool of herself on the spot because of her superb dancing skills and adaptability. Since she dared to scheme against her, she would definitely teach her a lesson. After nearly 4 hours of competition, the winners of each skill were finally decided. Yi Ying's results were slightly worse than last year's. Although she did her best to display a flying immortal dance, she barely tied with Princess Xixia for first place. However, young Master Feng San, who was known as the zither master in the capital, vetoed it. He lost to Lu Ruyun, the daughter of the Lu family, and was placed second. After that, she got third place in the poem competition, but it was difficult to hide Yi Ying's aggrieved and defeated expression. On the other hand, Princess Xixia, as an outsider, shone brightly in the later competitions. She got third place in zither, first in calligraphy, and second in chess. As a result, Princess Xixia became the champion of this 100-flower festival with 2 first places, 1 second place, and 1 third place. Zhaoyang, eldest princess, was clearly very satisfied with this result. The judges in the stands also praised this foreign princess a bit more. Just as old Master Su Zhou was about to announce the results of the 100-flower festival, Princess Xixia bent down and whispered a few words in Zhaoyang princess's ear. Then she stood up and bowed apologetically to old Master Su. She turned around and looked at the gloomy Yi Ying below the stage. A cold smile flashed across her face. "Everyone, please forgive me. Xixia requests to redo the dance competition with 4th young Miss Yi," Princess Xixia said in a clear voice. The venue suddenly became noisy. Feng Zhiyao lazily leaned in his chair and looked at Princess Xixia with a smile. To be able to see the dance of the princess and the capital's #1 beauty again, I believe everyone here will be very happy. But, why do you want to redo it? Princess Xixia raised her head and proudly said, "Doesn't your central plane say that there is no first place in literature and no second place in martial arts? Although this dance is not the same as martial arts, this princess is not used to being on the same level as others." As she spoke, she disdainfully glanced at Yi Ying. She was just short of saying that Yi Ying did not deserve to be on the same level as her. Below the stage, Yi Ying's face immediately turned pale. Her slender figure was on the verge of collapsing. In the eyes of everyone present, Princess Xixia was unavoidably going too far in bullying others. Princess Xixia did not care about other people's gazes. She only stared at Yi Ying. Feng Zhiyao lazily swept his phoenix eyes over Mo Jingli, who was sitting on the side with a gloomy expression. He smiled and said, "Your Highness Prince Li, what do you think? After all, 4th young Miss Yi is your fiancé." Mo Jingli glanced at Yi Ying below the stage. There was a slight fluctuation in his cold eyes. He faintly said, "Is Princess Xixia dissatisfied with Yaoji's judging?" Yaoji smiled sweetly. Suddenly, she was very charming. If Princess Xixia has an even more beautiful dance, Yaoji is naturally willing to appreciate it. But I don't know if I have the honor. Mo Jingli was silent. Although he did not know much about dancing, Mo Jingli naturally knew that Yi Ying and Princess Xixia's dancing skills should be on par with each other from Yaoji's previous results. But dancing was a skill to be appreciated with one's eyes. Even if the two people's skills were almost the same, Princess Xixia's enthusiasm was obviously more moving than Yi Ying's grace and elegance. This situation could be called a high standard and a low standard. If Yi Ying lost to Princess Xixia again, Mo Jingli's handsome straight eyebrows gradually furrowed. Seeing that he did not speak, Zhaoyang royal princess on the main seat frowned with some displeasure. "Jingli, Ah, there was a low cry from below the stage. Then there was the crisp sound of porcelain falling to the ground. Everyone looked towards the sound. The maid beside Yi Ying was kneeling on the ground and begging for mercy. Yi Ying's face was pale as she covered her left arm. Her left arm was already wet. It was obvious that the maid who served tea had accidentally spilled the tea on Yi Ying. Mo Jingli got up and jumped down from the stands. He pulled Yi Ying into his arms and kicked away the maid kneeling on the ground. Get lost! On the stage, Princess Royal's face suddenly turned ashen. Mo Jingli had kicked her maid from her Princess Royal's residence. Someone, invite the imperial physician to treat Miss Yi. The young ladies present couldn't come back to their senses when they saw this sudden turn of events. Although each of them tried their best to maintain their manners as young ladies from noble families, it did not prevent them from privately exchanging their opinions in various ways. TSK, Miss Li, you have to be careful. Your sister is ruthless. After a few hours of sitting, Mu Longting's address for Yi Ying had evolved from Miss Yi, Yi Li, to the intimate Miss Li. If it was really that maid who had accidentally spilled the tea on Yi Ying, Mu Longting would not believe it even if she bet on her brain that she did not like to read. How could it be so coincidental that Princess Xixia had just issued a challenge and Yi Ying was scalded? Hua Tianxiang frowned. I don't know why, but I have a bad feeling. Chapter 29. Yi Li raised her eyebrows. Before she could speak, she heard Yi Ying, who was also in Mo Jingli's arms, say to Princess Xixia in a weak and regretful voice, Princess, I'm really sorry. I'm afraid Yi Ying can't compete with the princess. Since the princess isn't convinced. How about asking sister to replace Yi Ying? Sister is the legitimate daughter of the minister's manor. She won't disgrace the princess. Sister, don't you think so? Hearing this, Yi Li's calm face sank. How could Yi Ying not know that she couldn't dance? If she lost, it would be because Yi Li was useless and disgraced the minister's manor, not because she wasn't as good as Princess Xixia. Not only did she avoid the possibility of losing to Princess Xixia, but she also successfully made Yi Li lose face in her first party. It was indeed a good plan. Just do as Ying said. Mo Jingli impatiently ordered. Without waiting for the imperial physician to arrive, he directly picked up Yi Ying and prepared to leave the venue. Seeing Mo Jingli leave without hesitation, the eldest princess's eyes sank. After a while, she said in a deep voice, in that case, let Yi third Miss replace Yi fourth Mississippi. Yi Li was speechless. Was there really no one who thought of asking if she could dance? Almost everyone's eyes fell on Yi Li, Qin Zheng and the others also looked at her nervously. Although they had previously urged Yi Li to win a place, they didn't really want to force Yi Li to do it. Not to mention that they were new friends, they couldn't harm Qin Zheng and Yi Li's future relationship. Princess Xixia's heart was burning with anger because of Mo Jingli and Yi Ying's departure. Coincidentally, Yi Li, who was pushed out by Mo Jingli to replace her, was Mo Jingli's ex-fiancée. So Princess Xixia's anger directly stopped at Yi Li. She raised her delicate eyebrows, Miss Yi, you go first. Yi Li helplessly stood up and met Princess Xixia's hateful gaze. She thought for a moment before saying, I admit defeat. Everyone, including Princess Xixia, was stunned. After a while, Princess Xixia came back to her senses and glared at Yi Li. Are you looking down on this princess? This princess doesn't need you to give in. Yi Li shook her head helplessly. I didn't go easy on the princess. I sincerely admit defeat. Admitting defeat without even fighting? Even if I win, it's not a fair fight. Forcing people who don't know how to dance to compete is even worse, isn't it? Yi Li sighed softly and looked sincerely at Princess Xixia, who was angrily staring at her. Princess, I don't know how to dance. So, you were played by Yi Ying. He, His Highness King Li and the future Princess Consort Li are really creative to want someone who doesn't know how to dance. Feng Jiao's voice sounded lazily, his voice filled with schadenfreude. Princess Xixia was also stunned. Why don't you know how to dance? Because dancing isn't a required course for the young ladies of Dechu State. I believe that many of the young ladies here don't know how to dance. Yi Li answered confidently. Not knowing how to dance was not something to be ashamed of. In reality, there were very few young ladies of Dechu State who would learn how to dance, unless they really liked it or their family had the intention of sending their daughter into the palace. Since Yi Li had already expressed that she had never learned how to dance, forcing her to dance would be unreasonable. Princess Xixia also understood that she had been played by Yi Ying and could only temporarily suppress the anger in her heart. She stared at the calm and elegant blue-clothed young lady below the stage. Her eyes flashed slightly. Just now, I didn't see Miss Yi go on stage. Since fourth Miss Yi has so much confidence in Jijia, then please show Miss Yi's talents in other areas. Or. She looked at Yi Li with a ghost of a smile. She paused for a moment before raising her voice to say, or Miss Yi doesn't know anything. Yi Li lowered her head and was silent for a moment. She raised her head and looked indifferently at Princess Xixia. If so, then Yi Li will embarrass herself. Yi Li. Qin Jing said worriedly. Murong Ting and Hua Tianxiang also looked worriedly at Yi Li. Yi Li blinked at her and shook her head with a slight smile. Qin Jing saw that her smile was not forced and her heart relaxed a bit. Thinking about it, Li Er's mother was the most talented woman in the capital and her maternal grandfather was the most outstanding person in the world. Even if she didn't show it normally, she should have learned everything she needed to learn. Under everyone's gaze, Yi Li walked to the table where the brush and ink were still placed. After thinking for a moment, she picked up the brush and began to move on the fine rice paper. On the stage, Feng Xiao looked with interest at the blue-clothed young lady who was painting with her head down and nodded inadvertently. Sitting next to him, Yaoji glanced at him and laughed in a low voice. Feng San thinks highly of Yi San Xiaojie. Feng Xiao rubbed his nose and said with a smile, isn't she very interesting? At least she's not as mediocre as the rumors say. This calm attitude was enough to make Feng Xiao think highly of her. Not to mention that Imo Jingli had suffered a loss at her hands not long ago. Maybe Yao would really marry a good princess this time. Marquis Muyang's heir also seemed to be interested in the topic of the two. Feng San knows Yi San Xiaojie. Feng Xiao shook his head. You just returned to the capital and you don't know? The future Princess Ding. Imo Xiaoyao. Muyang frowned. He had some friendship with Imo Xiaoyao when he was young, but since Imo Xiaoyao's accident, they had not seen each other again. Feng Xiao nodded. That's right. What do you think? Muyang raised his eyebrows. Imo Jingli's eyes are blind. Yaoji couldn't help but chuckle. She covered her mouth and laughed. It seems that Feng San and Mu Gongzi are very optimistic about Yi San Xiaojie. The two did not answer, but once again looked at the girl in green who was holding the brush and writing rapidly. They were all from famous families, so they naturally understood each other's meaning. It had nothing to do with appearance or talent. It was just that compared to Yi Ying, Yi Li was more suitable to be the mistress of a big family or a prince's mansion. They didn't know whether Imo Jingli, who was born in the royal family, was spoiled by the Empress Dowager and the old concubine, or whether Yi Ying's ability was really extraordinary and unknown to outsiders. Everyone waited for less than the time it takes to burn a stick of incense. Yi Li had already stopped writing. Princess Royal ordered the servants to bring Yi Li's work over. When the rice paper left the table, everyone vaguely saw that it seemed to be a peony painting. Qin Zheng and the other two also breathed a sigh of relief. Whether they could get a ranking or not, to be able to complete a peony painting that was not too bad in such a short time, at least Yi Li would lose face. The painting was first presented to the 6 judges on the judging panel for appreciation. Old Lord Suzhe, who saw the painting first, frowned and looked up at the girl in green who was still standing by the table. He lowered his head and continued to look at it for a while before passing it to the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Personnel, Mo Jian. Mo Jian also frowned and looked up at Yi Li from time to time. After a while, he passed it to the person next to him. The unusual reaction of the judges made the young ladies under the stage unable to stop looking at Yili. They were also curious about what Yili's work was like. When Feng Zhiao was the last to finish looking at the painting, he handed it to the maid next to him to present it to Princess Royal. Several other people also discussed the result. Su Zhe announced, Miss Yili, the daughter of the Minister of Revenue, is first in calligraphy, first in poetry, and fourth in painting. Chapter 30. Li Li. Hearing the result, Mu Rongting called out with joy. Everyone else also looked at Yili with surprise. Yili bowed slightly to the person on stage before returning to her seat. Mu Rongting raised her hand to slap her and said with a smile, "You said you couldn't do it, but you hid your skills well." Yili gave a bitter smile, "It was just a trick." Hua Tianxiang smiled and said, "No matter what, you should be happy." Li Li, congratulations. Qin Zheng pursed her lips and nodded to her with a smile. Yili returned a smile. Princess Xixia's expression changed when she heard Su Zhe's words. She didn't care about etiquette and walked over to the Sunshine eldest princess to look at Yili's painting. After a while, she raised her head and looked at Yili with a complicated expression, not saying anything. The eldest princess's maid brought the painting down for all the young ladies to look at. After all, because of Yili's work, the competition's ranking had changed, so everyone had to be convinced. The girl who had already won first place in poetry came from a scholarly family and was very reasonable. After seeing Yili's painting, she stood up and said with a smile, "Losing to Master Qin Yun's descendant is a glorious defeat." Her good upbringing and demeanor made people look at her even more highly. Mu Rongting received the painting and quickly opened it to share with her friends. Qin Zheng gave a sigh of praise, "Good poem." Falling to the last crimson, called the 100-Flower King. Unparalleled beauty under the heavens, the world's #1 fragrance. Hua Tianxiang smiled and said, "The poem is good and the words are also good." Li Li, who did you learn to write from? I also want to be your disciple. Yili gave a faint smile. When I was young, I received a letter from a teacher named Lu. After writing for so many years, I can finally read a bit. In her previous life, she had learned the Lu style at the age of 6. Including this life, it had been over 20 years. If she still couldn't read it, then it could only prove that she was stupid. Qin Zheng was also someone who was obsessed with calligraphy and painting. She was extremely envious. You're so lucky. Li Er said that you have to send me an invitation later. Yili nodded. The original post is gone. Can I write it? It's a deal. I'll be waiting for you. Me too. Hua Tianxiang and Mu Rongting didn't want to be left behind. Yili promised to give each of them a portion. I also admit defeat. Everyone else acknowledged the judge's conclusion. Even if Princess Xixia was unwilling, she could only grit her teeth and accept it. Zhao Yang Crown Princess looked at Princess Xixia's unwilling appearance and sighed. She pulled her in front of her and patted her to comfort her. Xixia had just arrived in Dechu State, but she was still young and hot-blooded. She didn't know if this temperament was good or bad. Since that's the case, then, the champion of this year's 100-Flower Festival will be the third young miss of the Minister of Revenue's residence. Since no one had any objections, Old Master Su Zhe announced the final result of this year's competition on behalf of the judges. Feng Zhiao smiled like a spring breeze and added, "Of course, if there's anyone who isn't convinced, they can continue to challenge third young Miss Yi. I believe third young Miss Yi will be very happy to accept the challenge. Isn't that right?" Yili raised her head and happened to see Feng Zhiao winking at her. Although he looked frivolous, she could feel that he didn't have any ill intentions. The champion of this year's 100-Flower Festival, Yili, under the urging of Qin Zheng and the others, slowly stepped onto the high platform. She personally received this year's prize from Princess Royal. The beauty pearl, purple jade hairpin, snow zither that all beautiful women dreamed of. Yili didn't feel guilty about winning the prize in a way that could almost be considered cheating. Of course, there was nothing to be proud of. Between losing face and cheating, of course she would choose the one that was more beneficial to her. Third young Miss Yi, I didn't expect Minister Yi to have such an outstanding daughter. Princess Royal looked at the girl in green in front of her and looked at Yi Li with some disappointment. I had some friendship with your mother in the past. If you have free time in the future, you might as well come to the Princess Royal residence for a walk. Yi Li respectfully smiled and said, Thank you, Princess Royal. It's Yi Li's fortune to be invited by Princess Royal. Good child, go. Princess Royal sighed and said to Yi Li. Yi Li bowed to the eldest princess, then turned to the judges and bowed slightly. Only then did she turn around and leave with the gift. What did you say? Yi Li 100 Flower Festival? Yi Residence, Yi Ying's returning snow pavilion. Yi Ying's always gentle and elegant voice had an indescribable grating to it. In the elegantly decorated parlor, the servant girls kneeled on the ground and fearfully replying to young Miss, that is indeed the rumor outside. Third young Miss has already returned to the residence. Also, the Imperial Censor residence, Qin family, Su family, Huaguo residence, Yangwei General's residence, Prime Minister's residence, and Minister of Rights residence all sent gifts to congratulate third young Miss on winning. A crack finally appeared on Yi Ying's beautiful face. With a wave of her hand, she swept all the things on the table to the ground. The servant girl kneeling at the front didn't dare cry out in pain and quickly said, Young Miss, please calm down. Calm down what? Yi Li, how could that bitch Yi Li become 100 Flower Festival's champion? Yi Ying shouted in disbelief. She pushed Yi Li out because she knew that her mother didn't specially hire anyone to teach her. She would definitely lose face against Princess Xixia, who even she wasn't sure she could win. At that time, even if she didn't become 100 Flower Festival's champion this year, she would lose without a fight, so it wouldn't be shameful. More importantly, at that time, everyone would know that only she, Yi Ying, was the Yi family's most outstanding daughter. Even if Yi Li was the Su family's granddaughter, she still couldn't compare to her. Even though she was furious, Yi Ying quickly calmed down and recovered her usual elegance and gentleness. She stood up and said, Get up, let's go see mother. The servant girls in the parlor secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Those who had to clean up the mess cleaned up, and those who had to follow Yi Ying hurriedly tidied up their appearance and followed Yi Ying to see Wang Shi. Inside Rong Lahali Li sat quietly, allowing old Madame Yi, Minister Yi, and Wang Shi to size her up. Old Madame Yi looked at Yi Li with a loving smile and said, Yi Li is indeed our Yi family's legitimate daughter. Now you're amazing. Our Yi family has produced 200 Flower Festival's champions. In this capital, who doesn't praise us for teaching our daughter well? Yi Li pursed her lips and smiled faintly, Grandmother is too kind. It's all because of grandmother and father's good teaching. Minister Yi looked at his quiet and dignified daughter with a complicated expression. This daughter that he had never seriously paid attention to was completely different from the other daughters in the family. She looked unremarkable, but if you looked carefully, there was a kind of dignity and grace of a noble family. This made him think of the first time he saw his wife who had passed away. She was also so elegant and indifferent. She was so beautiful that it made people admire her, but at the same time, she was so elegant that it made people feel inferior. Even if she didn't grow up in the Su family, even if she didn't have the best upbringing, could the bloodline of the Su family still leave his other children in the dust? Minister Yi thought silently when he thought of his daughter's performances at the 100 Flower Festival that he heard others mention. Then he thought of Yi Rong, who was spoiled by his mother, and Wang Shi. Minister Yi felt even more regretful. Why wasn't Yi Li a boy? Chapter 31. The Qin family, the Su family, the Hua family, the Lu family, these families who sent gifts, you must give them back carefully. Old Madame Yi looked at Wang Shi, who was sitting on the side with her eyes down, and ordered. Wang Shi quickly hid the light in her eyes and said respectfully, Old Madam, don't worry. I know. Old Madame Yi nodded with satisfaction. As for those gifts, send them to Qingyi Xian. Li, see if there's anything you like and buy some jewelry and clothes. All the families had sent out invitations. Although not all of them had to go, they couldn't go without a single family. Don't lose the face of the minister's mansion. Before Yi Li could answer, the servant outside the door reported that Si Xiaojie had arrived. Yi Ying changed into a thin white dress and her face was a little pale, looking more delicate and weak. She came in holding the servant's hand and greeted old Madam Yi and Minister Yi. Then she said with a pale face, "Ying has lost face for the Yi family. Please punish me." Old Madam Yi raised her white eyebrows and looked at Minister Yi without speaking. Minister Yi had always doted on Yi Ying, even more than Yi Jiaoyi who had entered the palace. How could he bear to punish her? Wang Shi quickly took her daughter into her arms and comforted her softly, "Silly child, how can this be blamed on you? If it weren't for the accident, the champion of 100 Flowers would still be Ying." Minister Yi nodded and said with Wang Shi, "Your mother is right. It's not your fault. Get up quickly. You're weak and the ground is cold." Looking at the happy family of 3 in front of her, Yi Li's expression was indifferent. Her face was still respectful, but she had already begun to think of the new friends she made today. Especially Qin Zheng, her future cousin-in-law. She had to think about what to give them in return. There were so many things to do recently. She had no time to participate in this boring family drama. Thinking about her future married life, maybe she could get a husband who was not too good or too bad. If possible, they could form a peaceful and happy family. Maybe she could have 1 or 2 children of her own. While old Madam Yi was sizing up the girl in green, Yi Li's mind had already wandered off and was thinking about the things that she needed to do. Old Madam Yi looked at the scene in front of her and sighed secretly. In the past, Yi Yu and Yi Ying were good friends. Now, she realized that Yi Li was the one who had kept a low profile. With this calmness, old Madam Yi believed that if it was Yi Li who entered the palace, she might be able to go further. Unfortunately, Yi Li had chosen the crippled Prince Ding, who was destined to have no future. The heavens were truly toying with him. "Grandmother, it's a joyous occasion for our Yi family that elder sister won first place. Shouldn't we tell second sister and let her be happy too?" Yi Ying walked to old Madam Ye's side and said in a sweet voice when the family of 3 was finally done with each other. Yi Shangshu smiled and said, "It's rare for Ying to be so broad-minded. Mother, you see. In a few days, you'll have to enter the palace to pay your respects. At that time, I'll report this good news to Jiaoyi Nyang. Old Madam Yi nodded and looked sideways at Yi Li. She smiled and said, "Your second sister has always been very good to your sisters. In the future, each of you will be in charge of a manor. You should go and accompany her more." "Grandmother." Yi Ying covered her face shyly and called out in a low voice. Her pale face blushed. In contrast, Yi Li was less shy as a girl. Yi Shangshu looked at his youngest daughter lovingly and laughed with her. Yi Ying looked at Yi Li with her beautiful eyes and said softly, "Third sister hasn't seen second sister for a long time, right? Mother should prepare a good gift for second sister for third sister." Wang Shi was stunned and looked at Yi Ying with a frown. However, old Madam Yi was moved and looked at Yi Li again. She hesitated but didn't say anything. Yi Li saw old Madam Yi and Yi Ying's expressions and understood what Yi Ying meant. She looked at Yi Ying calmly and looked forward to her performance. Yi Ying saw that Wang Shi didn't understand her words and old Madam Yi didn't change her expression. She couldn't help but frown and reminded softly, "Sister Jiaoyi is pregnant now. I heard that when a woman is pregnant, her appearance, the people present were not really stupid." Wang Shi immediately reacted when she heard the word appearance. She looked at Yi Li with more enthusiasm. "Master," Yi Li sighed helplessly in her heart. "No one in this family was a fool. Ying is right. Li, send the youth-retaining pearl to the palace as a gift for Jiaoyi. You can ask your mother for whatever you want." Yi Shangshu obviously didn't think there was anything wrong with Yi Ying's proposal and immediately made the decision. Youth-retaining pearl. Yi Li was bored and thought of the most coveted emerald pearl among the 3 prizes she received. It was said that people who wore the youth-retaining pearl could stay young forever. For women who loved beauty, It was more attractive than precious jewelry and bright clothes. However, for Yi Li, who was mentally old and physically 15 years old, it wasn't that attractive. Everyone loved beauty. She was still very young now. She only needed to take care of herself a little in the future and pursue beauty when her appearance was basically consistent with her actual age. If she was 50 years old and still had a face of 20 years old, Yi Li wasn't sure if she would like it that much. What's more, she was still skeptical about the youth-retaining pearl's so-called eternal youth. At least, although the original owner of the youth-retaining pearl, Zhaoyang elder princess, was younger than her peers, she was far from being in her prime. However, she didn't care. It didn't mean that others could take it away at will. "Father, please forgive me. The youth-retaining pearl is no longer with Li." Yi Li said faintly. "How is that possible?" Yi Ying exclaimed and then looked at Yi Li suspiciously. "Third sister, could it be that you don't want to part with the youth-retaining pearl?" Ying is thinking for Zhao Yinyang. After all, Zhao Yinyang is the support of our Yi family. In this regard, Yi Li snorted disdainfully in her heart. Support? How many aristocratic families that could stand firm for 100 years relied on nepotism? Fourth sister, you're thinking too much. It's just a pearl. I've already given it away. Given it away? How could you give it away? Wangshi shrieked. Which woman wouldn't want the youth-retaining pearl? If it weren't for her daughter in the palace, Wangshi would have wanted to take the youth-retaining pearl for herself. Yi Li looked at her strangely and said in confusion, "Li is only 15 years old. It's far from the time when you need the youth-retaining pearl." She wasn't like the ancient people who thought that 14 or 15 years old girls were the most beautiful. Even if ancient girls matured early, a 14 or 15-year-old girl was still too young. Even someone as beautiful as Yi Ying couldn't compare to a 20-year-old girl like Yaoji. Old Madame Ye's eyes darkened. She looked at Yi Li and said, "Who did Li give it to? Let's see if we can exchange it back. Even if we can exchange it for something more precious." Yi Li frowned and looked at old Madame Yi without blinking. Her expression was a bit strange. Exchange it back? Chapter 32. Old Madame Yi was already a shrewd person. How could she not know how rude it was to ask for a gift back after giving it out? But the beauty-retaining pearl was very useful to Zhao Yinyang. She believed that in 2 days, when the news of the 100-Flower Festival reached the palace, Zhao Yinyang would ask them for it. Moreover, she didn't plan to ask for it back in the name of the Yi family. In the end, Yi Li would personally ask for it back. Of course, old Madame Yi suspected that this was just Yi Li's excuse. Yi Li didn't want to take it out at all. Squeezing out a kind smile, old Madame Yi said softly, "Good child, grandmother knows this is a bit rude. But you also know how important this beauty-retaining pearl is to Zhao Yinyang. Zhao Yinyang has a hard time in the palace. If she has the beauty-retaining pearl and can get the emperor's favor." Yi Li frowned and said helplessly, "But grandmother, I've already sent the beauty-retaining pearl and snow zither to eldest uncle." Minister Ye's face darkened. He angrily stared at Yi Li and said, "Nonsense. What does your eldest uncle need the beauty-retaining pearl for? If it was someone else, Minister Yi might have sent people to stop them. But Minister Yi didn't have the guts to stop them from giving something to his deceased wife's eldest uncle. Master Qingyun had 2 sons and 1 daughter. The second son, Su Hongyan, was the only one in the Su family who was still in the government. In fact, the one who made Minister Yi feel the most pressure was his eldest uncle, Su Hongyu, who had left the capital 10 years ago. At the same time, he was the most famous scholar in the world. Unlike imperial censor Su, who was refined yet sharp and principled, this great scholar, who was praised by the world and said to have surpassed his master, always had a cultured and elegant demeanor. However, if he didn't like someone, that person would definitely suffer a fate worse than death. This was also the reason why Minister Yi didn't dare to send Yi Rong to Lishan Academy even though they were in-laws. This brother-in-law of his was not as upright as he looked on the outside. Back then, he had deeply experienced this. Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "A few days ago, eldest uncle wrote a letter saying that grandfather's pine organ was broken a few days ago." So when Li heard the sound of the snow, she was happy and immediately sent someone to deliver it to grandfather. At the same time, I also remembered that the beauty-retaining pearl was of no use to Li, so I decided to send the beauty-retaining pearl to eldest aunt. Of course, she also sent the purple jade hairpin, which was said to have health benefits, to second aunt. Minister Ye's face was distorted again. He didn't know why, but when he heard that the pine organ that his daughter gave to his father-in-law was broken, he suddenly felt an inexplicable chill on his back. He was also angry and guilty in his heart. Therefore, she couldn't put on a tough attitude towards Yi Li. She just scolded reluctantly, "You, child, why didn't you discuss it with your parents?" Yi Li raised her eyebrows carelessly. Was it because her father had been an official for too long that his brain was not working well, or did he really think that Madame Wang was virtuous? To give a gift to the former father-in-law, he still had to discuss it with the concubine's second wife. After discussing it, could she still give it out? It's Li who didn't consider it. It's eldest uncle who said that grandfather was angry. Li can't be filial in front of grandfather. Today, when I got the snow sound of the zither, I was happy and immediately sent it away. Yi Li lowered her head guiltily. Minister Yi smiled reluctantly and said, "Father knows that Li is filial." "Father?" Yi Ying anxiously called. Minister Ye's expression was solemn. He waved his hand and said, "This matter is over. No need to say any more. Later, send more banknotes to you into the palace. Bribing the people in the palace can't be saved." Although Madame Wang was unwilling, but she had followed Minister Yi for 20 years. She understood her husband better than anyone. Looking at his face, she knew that this matter was not negotiable. She couldn't help but resent Yi Li and the late Madame Yi in her heart. It was like this every time. As long as the Su family was mentioned, her husband would never think of her. Could it be that the Su family was his in-laws' family and her Wang family was not? Coming out of Rong Le Hall, Yi Li was annoyed and gently sighed. She looked at Yi Ying who followed behind her and said, "Fourth sister, I'll go back first." Yi Ying acted as if she didn't hear Yi Li's words. She softly said with a smile, "Third sister is really generous. That kind of priceless treasure is given away without even looking at it. Fourth sister is joking. Grandfather and two aunts are not outsiders. What's more, the two aunts take good care of sister. Although sister was born in the minister's residence, everything around her is not hers. Now that I finally have a few things that I can take out, I naturally have to show filial piety to the elders. After all, people should have a grateful heart, right? And you, all these years, eating and using my mother's dowry money, have you ever thought about her? Third sister is right. I've learned my lesson." Yi Ying gritted her teeth and said in a low voice. Yi Li smiled, "I'm a common person. I only know how to use these things to repay the care of the elders. I can't compare to fourth sister's elegance and refinement. You don't care about these things. Fourth sister, take care. Third sister, take care." Ignoring how Yi Ying's expression changed behind her, Yi Li leisurely walked in the direction of Qing Yixian. "Qing Shuang, have someone tell concubine Zhao that it's almost time. Find something for madam to do. I don't want to see them in the near future." Yes, Mississippi concubine Zhao was indeed a smart person. She didn't need Yi Li's help and advice at all. The next day, the Fu spread the news that concubine Zhao was pregnant, and it was said to be a boy. Wang Shi almost immediately forgot about making trouble for Yi Li and began to think of ways to deal with concubine Zhao. She had a stable foundation in the Yi family. It would be a joke to say that she was worried about what Yi Li, a girl who was about to get married, would do to her. The reason she targeted Yi Li was because of the unspeakable jealousy and resentment she felt towards Yi Li's birth mother. Now that the matter concerned her precious only son's position in the Fu, Wang Shi naturally didn't hesitate to put other things aside. Wang Shi didn't come looking for trouble, and Yi Ying's vitality was greatly damaged because of the failure at the 100-Flower Festival. Yi Li was at ease. After showing her talent at the 100-Flower Festival, Yi Li gradually entered the social circle of the capital's noble ladies. Other than continuing to prepare the dowry, she could also invite Qin Zheng, Hua Tianxiang, and Murong Ting to play together when she had free time. On the third day after the 100-Flower Festival, the young miss who was originally the first in poetry and was surpassed by Yi Li also had the surname Qin. She was the sister of the capital's magistrate, Qin Mu. Qin Yuling also sent an invitation to Yi Li. Although they didn't have much contact, Yi Li had a good impression of this iron-faced magistrate's sister. After exchanging letters a few times, they became more familiar with each other. Yi Li, who was in a good mood, didn't mind concubine Zhao coming to her Qing Yi Xian from time to pay her respects. She naturally knew what concubine Zhao was thinking. As long as she abided by her promise, Yi Li wouldn't break her promise. She would naturally ensure that she reached Yunzhou safely and gave birth to the child. On this day, Yi Li agreed to Qin Zheng's invitation to go shopping. Yi Li had been idle for the past few days and was preparing to buy some books for herself. She had read most of the books her mother had left behind. However, Yi Li was clear about her own abilities. Even if she had a photographic memory and memorized all the books in this world, she would never be able to become a talented woman like Qin Zheng, who was proficient in zither, chess, calligraphy, painting, poetry, and song. To put it simply, she didn't have the talent, even if her mother was once the most talented woman in the capital. More importantly, with the memories of her previous life, her thinking and vision had long been fixed. Even after so many years, she still couldn't understand the artistic conception and thinking of the ancient people. Therefore, she could write a few limericks. If she wanted to write an outstanding poem, it was basically impossible. Thinking like this, Yi Li felt that her grandfather, who had forced her to memorize so many ancient books, was really too wise. At least, he allowed her to pull out 2 poems from her mind to make up the numbers when she couldn't refuse. Chapter 33. Sister Qin, Tianxiang, Murong. When Yi Li arrived at the appointed tea house, Qin Zheng and the other 2 had already arrived and were drinking tea and chatting happily. Qin Zheng looked back at her and smiled. Li er. Murong Ting pulled her to sit down. You're finally here. How was it? Did your damn sister make things difficult for you? Yi Li raised her eyebrows. Sorry I'm late, but why do you think she would make things difficult for me? Not only Madame Wang, but even Yi Ying had been away for the past few days. How could they have the time to make things difficult for her when they couldn't even see her? It's better to be careful. I heard that Her Highness Zhaoi in the palace has been in a bad mood these days. Hua Tianxiang held the teacup with a reserved and elegant smile. Yi Li blinked her eyes, understanding in her heart. She thanked Hua Tianxiang silently. Hua Tianxiang raised her eyebrows and raised her teacup to her. Murong Ting looked at her good friends around her and couldn't help but laugh. Alas, it's not easy to have one more friend. Unfortunately, Li will be getting married soon. We'll still be friends after we get married, Yi Li said. Don't tell me you won't recognize me as a friend after we get married? Murong Ting leaned on the table without the temperament of a noble lady and said dejectedly, of course not. But when you become Princess Ding, how will you have so much freedom? Hua Tianxiang pursed her lips and snickered. It'll be the same when you get married. I don't want to. Murong Ting shouted, her almond-shaped eyes widening. I won't marry that idiot. Yi Li looked up in surprise at the angry Murong Ting and then turned her gaze to Qin Zheng. Qin Zheng snickered and whispered in Yi Li's ear. Only then did Yi Li know that Murong Ting was engaged to Leng Haoyu, the 3rd young master of the northern general's estate, as soon as she was born. But compared to his eldest brother, Leng Qingyu, who was proficient in both literature and martial arts, Leng Haoyu was a hedonistic son who was good at eating, drinking, and playing. How could Murong Ting, who came from a family of generals and was the only daughter of General Yang Wei, like Leng Haoyu? The 2 of them had been at odds ever since they were young. Basically, they would fight whenever they met. However, Murongting had learned martial arts from the Yangwei general, and Ling Haoyu couldn't beat Murongting. Every time she was beaten to a pulp, Murongting despised her even more. Humph. My father is a stubborn person. He says that once a man makes a promise, he must keep it. He won't break off the engagement even if he dies. That idiot. Since he dared to marry me, I'll beat him up until his father can't recognize him. Murongting raised her little chin and said angrily. Hua Tianxiang lazily rested her chin on her hand and said with a smile, I think Ling Shaosen treats you well. Have you ever seen a man so obedient in the entire capital? If you tell him to go forward, he will never go backward. If you tell him to go left, he will never go right. Murongting snorted and did not answer. Yi Li watched her reaction with interest. It was inevitable for girls to like outstanding and strong men. Murongting naturally looked down on third young Master Lang, who couldn't even beat a woman. However, it seemed that Murongting didn't hate her fiancé as much as she thought. Moreover, was a man who had been beaten since he was young and had lost every time. Was he really that weak? If that was the case, then Ling Haoyu was actually a masochist, right? Yi Li's imagination ran wild in her mind. However, she didn't say anything to persuade Murongting. She didn't like to interfere with her friend's choice. Moreover, she really didn't know Ling Haoyu. Murongting recovered quickly from her anger. She quickly put the annoying fiancé behind her, clapped her hands and stood up. Let's go shopping. We're not here to drink tea. The three girls and a fake girl happily shuttled through the famous shops in the capital, picking out all kinds of jewelry and clothes they liked. Soon, everyone had a rich harvest. Yi Li looked at the people behind her, who were full of bags, and followed the three of them around in amusement. She had to admit that no matter what era it was, women's desire to shop was very strong. Yi Li wasn't idle either. While shopping with the three of them, she also glanced at the progress of the shops that were being renovated recently. Although she didn't go in, the results were satisfactory from the outside. She believed that they could reopen a month before the wedding. At that time, she might be able to ask her eldest cousin to raise a plaque for the treasure pavilion. Yi Li planned silently in her heart. After sending the servants who helped to carry the things back, the girls, who were tired from shopping, planned to find a place to have lunch. Murongting, who was most familiar with the delicacies in the capital, recommended the most famous Chu Xiang Pavilion in the capital. Chu Xiang Pavilion was indeed the most famous restaurant in the capital. As soon as they stepped into the lobby, they saw the luxurious and graceful decorations of the restaurant that didn't lose to those of famous families. They knew that the background of the owner of this restaurant was definitely not low. Although they didn't come late, the business of Chu Xiang Pavilion was better than expected. A well-dressed child respectfully apologized to the four of them, indicating that there were no more empty private rooms. Murongting often walked outside, so she didn't care about whether there were private rooms or not. She directly let the waiter lead the four of them to the second floor and found a relatively good empty seat to sit down. Yi Li glanced around the lobby. There was no lack of noble girls eating in twos and threes, so the four of them sitting outside didn't seem particularly eye-catching. After ordering the dishes, Murongting smiled with satisfaction. Chu Xiang Pavilion's squirrel mandarin fish is the best in the capital. I came twice and didn't eat it. I didn't expect that I would have it when I called you all together today. Today is really good luck. Yi Li curiously asked, Murong often comes out to shop. Murongting smiled and said, my father doesn't like to control me, and I can't stay alone, so I often come out to walk around. Moreover, my father loves to eat good food. I don't have any talent for this, so I just look around to see if there's anything good to buy for him to eat. Speaking of this, Murongting was a bit embarrassed. However, anyone could see that the father-daughter relationship of the Yangwei general's estate was definitely different from that of the Shangshu estate. At least, it was definitely different from the relationship between Shangshu Yi and Yi Li. Hua Tianxiang smiled and said, that's why, when I go shopping, I usually drag Murong out with me. There's no place in the capital that she doesn't know. While the four of them were happily talking, the door of the private room on the other side opened with a bang. A beautiful red figure rushed out from inside. The four of them simultaneously pretended to see the person clearly. Murong Ting said in surprise, "Ha! Isn't that, be careful." Before her voice fell, Murong Ting had already stood up and quickly jumped out. Chu Xiang Pavilion, second floor. A beautiful figure quickly rushed out of the private room and was about to collide with the waiter who was slowly carrying a tray of dishes. Murong Ting jumped out at the same time, wanting to grab the woman. However, she was still half a beat too slow and let the red sleeve slip past her fingertips. "Be careful." Yili calculated the direction that the hot pot of soup on the tray would be hit at almost the same time that the red-clothed woman bumped into the waiter. She casually grabbed the empty bowl on the table and threw it over. After hesitating for a while, the precise location and strength of the throw forced the soup pot that had just left the tray and was flying toward someone's head to the left. With a series of clanking sounds, the soup pot fell to the ground in an open space not far away. Because the waiter protected the tray with all his might, the remaining few plates fell to the ground in front of him and the soup splashed on a guest's clothes. There wasn't any serious damage. Chapter 34. The entire second floor was silent. The waiter's face was pale as he looked at the pot of soup on the ground and gratefully looked at the green-clothed young girl sitting next to him. If it wasn't for the girl throwing the bowl, the waiter knew very well that the pot of boiling soup that had just been put into the fire would very likely fall on the head of the young master who was sitting with his back to him by the stairs. It might even fly down to the first floor and hit the guests below. The red-clothed girl clearly didn't realize what kind of accident she could have caused. After being pulled back by Murong Ting, she angrily threw off her hand and angrily scolded, "You impudent! You dare to block this princess' anger!" Qin Zheng and the others finally saw that the red-clothed girl was the Nanzhao country's Princess Xixia that they had seen at the 100-Flower Festival a few days ago. Murong Ting didn't fall for this and coldly said, "If you want to put on the airs of a princess, go back to Nanzhao. There are so many people coming and going in the restaurant, yet you still charge around. What if you hurt someone?" Princess Xixia's face was ugly. It was clear that her mood was not very good. She disdainfully snorted and said, "It's just a few lowly commoners. So what if this princess is hurt?" When these words came out, the expressions of all the guests on the second floor changed. It had to be known that Chu Xiang Pavilion was one of the best restaurants in the capital. The price was not something normal people could afford. The people who came in and out were all rich and noble. Princess Xixia's arrogant words had undoubtedly offended everyone present. Hua Tianxiang stood up and her beautiful face was dyed with a trace of coldness. Her smile was still reserved and noble. "Even lowly commoners are my Chu state's lowly commoners. It doesn't seem like a princess of a small Nanzhao country has the right to belittle them." Nanzhao country was small and weak. If it wasn't for the three powerful countries that kept fighting each other for several hundred years, the small Nanzhao would have been swallowed up long ago. "You have big guts." Princess Xixia's face was gloomy as she angrily stared at Hua Tianxiang. Hua Tianxiang slightly raised her chin and stared back at her without showing any weakness. She was just a princess of a small country. She respected her a bit because of Zhao Yang, eldest princess. Did she really think that the nobles of the Chu state were afraid of her? "Princess Xixia, you should know what kind of place Chu Xiang Pavilion is. If someone is hurt, I'm afraid Princess Royal will be in a difficult position," Qin Jing said with a faint smile. Her eyes looking at Princess Xixia did not have the usual gentle aura. Princess Xixia's expression changed slightly. She snorted and glanced at the back of the man whose hair was almost washed by the boiling hot soup. "Isn't he fine? Mind your own business." Hua Tianxiang withdrew her gaze from Princess Xixia and smiled at Murong Ting. "Murong, forget it. She was a foreign princess after all. She didn't even know how to apologize. We'll just walk around them whenever we see them. Who knows who will be the next unlucky one?" Murong Ting looked Princess Xixia up and down in a serious manner. Then, she nodded and said, Tian Xiang, you are right. Also, everyone can just admit that they were unlucky today. Who told our great Princess Xixia to be in a bad mood? Waiter, are you scared, silly? Aren't you going to clean up? The waiter, who was frightened by the sudden situation, quickly apologized to the customers who were affected and hurriedly went to clean up the mess. Slut! Princess Xixia was so angry that her face turned green. She pulled down the long whip at her waist and lashed it at Hua Tian Xiang's face. Tian Xiang! Qin Jing exclaimed. A green shadow flashed and wrapped around the oncoming whip. Yili pulled Hua Tian Xiang away with one hand and grabbed the whip in front of her with the other. The slight pain in her palm made Yili frown. Because of the seat, she could only pull Hua Tian Xiang away for a moment. Then, she had to take Princess Xixia's whip. However, her palm didn't hurt as much as she expected. Yili looked over and realized that the whip in Princess Xixia's hand had already slipped out of her grasp. Her face was pale as she stared at Yili while holding the back of her hand. Yili raised her eyebrows and glanced at the surrounding diners. Finally, her gaze landed on the man leaning against the stairs who didn't turn around. Princess Xixia, those who come are guests. My Dechu state subjects respect you. I'm afraid that your habit of waving the whip around is not suitable for the Dechu state. Please conduct yourself with dignity. Waving her hand, Yili's cold gaze landed on Princess Xixia. Slowly putting the long whip back into her hand, Yili didn't plan on returning it to her. The girls of this era, even the cheerful and lively Mu Rongting, knew their limits. How could this Princess Xixia play with such a dangerous toy? This, I will have someone send it to the Princess Royal's residence. Yili, you think you can be proud just because you won the title of 100 Flower Queen? Didn't you get abandoned by Prince Li? Didn't you have to marry that trash of a Prince Ding? Humph, even this princess feels sorry for you. Yili's eyes were cold. I think that with Princess Xixia's knowledge and intelligence, she probably can't understand the significance and status of the Ding King's residence in the Dechu state. Naturally, she also can't understand the current emperor's kindness. Or perhaps Princess Xixia's forgetful brain has already forgotten that the trash you speak of swept through Nanjiang at the age of 15. Nanzhao was one of them, right? Your Highness the Princess of Nanzhao, who can't even compare to trash, do you still have the face to live? Can you still spout such nonsense here? As for the princess's pity, I probably can't bear it. It's better to keep it for myself. Yili's tone wasn't angry, nor was it hurried. However, it was this kind of slow and leisurely tone that made Princess Xixia's face turn from gloating to green, then purple, then black. Many of the diners present also began to quietly laugh. Hua Tian Xiang, who had been frightened by her face being almost disfigured, came back to her senses. She walked to Yili's side and smiled, Li, you've been exposed. How could a small country like Nanzhao know so much? I only hope that with the Princess Royal's guidance, some people will know what a true princess style is. After all, the Princess Royal is the model of a woman in our dynasty. Murong Ting walked over angrily. She had almost lost her courage from not being able to save Hua Tian Xiang in time. Now that she reacted, she didn't have a good expression towards Princess Xixia. Tian Xiang is right. Princess Xixia is only envious of Li. Although Li can't be Princess Ding, she can be Princess Ding. She didn't want a certain princess to travel thousands of miles, hehe. After being secretly pinched by Qin Zheng, Murong Ting reluctantly stopped her words and replaced them with two laughs. However, the meaning of that unfinished sentence was already clear enough. What's going on? Xixia, what are you doing? The door to the private room was opened again. Mo Jingli looked at this scene with a cold face and sword-like brows furrowed. When his gaze fell on Yili, his face became even more gloomy. Brother Jingli, they're bullying Xia. Seeing Mo Jingli come out, Princess Xixia hurriedly leaned over, a trace of a girl's delicate appearance on her face. Oh, everyone present pretended to be eating seriously, but their ears were pricked up. His Highness Princely was going to get married at the beginning of next month, right? Why was he having a tryst with Princess Shixia in a restaurant? Could it be that after His Highness Princely abandoned the Yi family's third miss, he was finally going to abandon the Yi family's fourth miss? Chapter 35. Mo Jingli frowned. He stared at Yi Li and said, "You don't need to make such a big fuss over such a small matter. Or is Yi Li trying to please the crowd? Give up, I will never marry you." If it wasn't for the fact that they were in public, Yi Li would have given him an unforgettable lesson. Will you die if you don't be narcissistic? Has your Highness King Li seen a doctor? What? Mo Jingli was stunned. Yi Li calmly said, "It's an illness to have uncontrolled fantasies at any time and place. It should be treated as soon as possible." Pucci, it was unknown who finally couldn't hold back their laughter. "Yi Li, you're bold." Mo Jingli had never been a good-tempered person. Being openly mocked by the woman he had abandoned, he was instantly enraged. His cold eyes released a trace of hostility. He raised a hand to grab Yi Li. Yi Li's eyes flashed coldly. She flipped her hand and her right hand that was hidden in her sleeve had already grabbed something. She was just waiting for Mo Jingli to come over. A shadow quickly flashed by. Mo Jingli's hand stopped one step away from Yi Li and could not move. A low and gentle voice lightly sounded, "King Li, are you dissatisfied with Ai's future princess?" The entire second floor was silent, and even the clamor downstairs seemed to be very far away. Everyone stared in shock at the place one step away from Yi Li. A youth wearing brown robes had firmly grabbed Mo Jingli's wrist that was reaching for Yi Li. But everyone present, including Mo Jingli, did not see where this youth had come from. Mo Jingli glared fiercely at the youth and then quickly looked towards the source of the voice. Yi Li didn't look at the person blocking Mo Jingli. When the voice sounded, she turned her gaze to the straight, plain-colored back at the staircase. Only then did people notice that this person was dressed in plain clothes and was not sitting on a chair in a restaurant. Instead, he was sitting on a wheelchair with an unusual style. However, because he had arrived early and his side was blocked by a vase half the height of a person, not many people noticed this. Originally, he seemed to be looking down at the situation in the lobby from the carved railings. It was only now that he turned his head slightly, allowing people to see half of his handsome face. He raised his hand and exerted force on the wheelchair. The wheelchair slowly turned to face the crowd. The man in the wheelchair was dressed in ordinary cotton clothing, but he did not have the decadence and dejection of people with disabilities. Even the people standing in front of him seemed to be shorter than him, and could only look up at him. There was a kind of person who didn't need fancy clothes or treasures, didn't need great power and guards. As long as he was there, he was an existence above everyone else. Half of the man's face was elegant and handsome, and had an innate noble and dignified aura. The left side of his face was covered by a frost mask made of an unknown material. It covered the entire left side of his face, but it gave people a mysterious feeling that they wanted to explore, even though they knew that underneath it was a hideous scar. Mo Jingli. Xiao Yao. After a long time, Mo Jingli finally spat out these three words. The three words Mo Xiaoyao seemed to have a magical power, causing the people who were originally stunned to finally come back to their senses. They looked in surprise at this person who had not appeared in people's lives for many years, and who was still graceful and calm even in a wheelchair. Looking at the man in front of them who was completely different from what they had imagined, the people who had long been used to the idea that Prince Ding was a crippled piece of trash suddenly remembered that this man had once been a stunning youth. This was once the second legitimate son of the Ding kingdom, and was once the object of envy of all the youths in the Dechu state. His literary talent was outstanding, and he was known as the world's #1 scholar. His martial arts were outstanding, and like his ancestors, his art of war was godly. At the age of 15, he was invincible in the southern border. He once had the most beautiful and talented woman in the capital as his fiancée, and both of them were the envy of the world. However, his good luck seemed to have suddenly ended when he was 18. His only elder brother died of illness, and the youth who had hurriedly inherited Prince Ding's title once again set out, but he was almost defeated and returned in defeat. Although the youth had turned the tide in the end, he had paid a price that could never be erased. Heavy injuries, disfigurement, and crippled legs. As if the heavens didn't think this was enough of a blow, 3 months later, his fiancée, who had been engaged to him for many years, died of illness. From then on, there were only a few people in the capital who could occasionally see Prince Ding's figure. If the youth Mo Xiaoyao was said to be stunning, in high spirits, and as dazzling as a raging fire. But when they met again a few years later, he was as warm and proper as jade, as calm and elegant as water. And how many people knew how much pain he had experienced during this change? Mo Jingli, I haven't seen you in many years, but you've grown up. Mo Xiaoyao looked at Yi Li, who was staring at him, before turning his gaze to Mo Jingli. Mo Jingli's already expressionless face became even more stiff, and he harshly said, "What happens to I has nothing to do with you." Mo Xiaoyao nodded in agreement. "I indeed don't intend to care about what you want to do, but, even if you don't want to pay attention to your own status, it's best to pay attention to other people's status." Mo Jingli frowned, looked at Yi Li, and a trace of ridicule appeared on his face. He waved away the youth who was clamping down on him, and turned back to look at Mo Xiaoyao. "You want to stand up for her? Mo Xiaoyao, you can't have really taken a fancy to this woman, right? You know, since we were young, our tastes have been as different as heaven and earth." Mo Xiaoyao didn't get angry, and there was even a faint smile on his face. "Also, to be disrespectful to the future mistress of the Ding royal household, Jingli, are you sure you want to do this?" Mo Jingli's face darkened, and he fiercely glared at Yi Li. He disdainfully smiled at Mo Xiaoyao and said, the future mistress of the Ding royal household? Mo Xiaoyao, are you sure you're talking about this woman? Princess Ding and the mistress of the Ding royal household were two completely different concepts to the imperial family. If it was only Princess Ding, he could still ignore it, but if this woman really took control of the Ding royal household. Mo Jingli suddenly realized that it was a big mistake to encourage his emperor brother to marry this woman to Mo Xiaoyao. "Your Highness Prince Li, please watch your words." The brown-clothed youth who had retreated to the side stared at Mo Jingli with an unkind expression. Mo Jingli snorted, and without saying goodbye, he turned around and went downstairs. Princess Shi Xia, who was following beside him, looked at the situation in front of her with some confusion. She frowned and quickly chased after him. The good show was over, and many people who had been stimulated by the news they received today also left in twos and threes, pretending that nothing had happened. After a while, the only people left on the second floor were Yi Li's table and Mo Xiaoyao's table. Yi Li helplessly smiled bitterly in her heart. After today, the capital would definitely be very lively. Cough cough, greetings to Prince. I suddenly remembered that I still have some things to buy. Zheng Murong Ting, come with me. Hua Tianxiang lightly coughed and prepared to run away without any sense of loyalty. Qin Zheng and Mu Rongting also quickly nodded. After seeing Mo Xiaoyao nod in agreement, they quickly went downstairs. Before Qin Zheng left, she didn't forget to give Yi Li a worried and encouraging look. Seeing the figures of her good friends disappear at the top of the stairs, Yi Li sighed in amusement. They wouldn't think that she was embarrassed like other little girls, right? Alright, seeing a fiancé that she had never met in this kind of situation, it seemed that she should express a certain degree of shyness. Thinking about it, Yi Li decided to give up on such a difficult performance. She raised her head and looked at Mo Xiaoyao, who was also sizing her up. "Prince, why don't we change places to talk? After all, people still have to do business here." Chapter 36. A trace of surprise flashed through Mo Xiaoyao's eyes as he silently nodded his head. Thus, the two of them moved to a private room on the third floor of Chu Xiang Pavilion. "Miss Yi, you've surprised me." In the only private room on the third floor, Mo Xiaoyao sat by the open window and looked at the girl in green who didn't seem the least bit uneasy. Yi Li smiled slightly. "Prince has also surprised me." If the man in front of her was the rumored crippled Prince Ding, then it could be seen just how unreliable the gossip in the capital was. So many years. It seems like there really is a problem with Jing Li's eyes. Mo Xiaoyao sighed as a trace of a smile flashed through his warm eyes. Yi Li smiled lightly, it's Prince's attitude that made Yi Li sigh. Actually, I always thought that I would receive a second annulment. Aren't you afraid? Afraid? Yi Li looked at him in confusion before quickly reacting, I'll do my best to be careful. Moreover, the imperial order is like a mountain. Rather than disobeying it, why not try to move forward? Perhaps there will be a different light. Mo Xiaoyao lifted his hand to take off the mask on his face. The hideous scar under the mask was immediately exposed to Yi Li's eyes. That hideous scar really did ruin the beauty of the mask, but to Yi Li, who had seen broken limbs, bombs, and corpses, it wasn't even enough to shock her. Thus, she only blinked her eyes and asked apologetically, Prince, are you trying to scare me? Mo Xiaoyao stared blankly before a faint smile appeared on his lips, no, actually I don't like wearing this. Even though half of his face had been destroyed, Mo Xiaoyao never wore a mask when he was alone. He wasn't someone who didn't dare to face himself. Yi Li nodded in agreement, I also don't like people who wear masks. With a mask on, it was hard to see a person's expression and thoughts. Mo Xiaoyao was speechless. The girl in front of him was completely different from the girl Feng Zhiao had investigated and his own conjecture. Looking at that calm and beautiful face, Mo Xiaoyao suddenly felt that Feng Zhiao was right. Yi Li was indeed a very interesting woman, and she was the best choice he could make. A woman who was very suitable to be the future mistress of the king's mansion. Rongelteng as usual, Yi Li sat in her seat with her head lowered. Facing the different expressions of everyone present, it was as if she didn't see anything. Minister Yi looked at his calm third daughter and aggrieved fourth daughter in front of him. He only felt a throbbing pain in his head. Originally, he wanted to reprimand Yi Li as usual, but looking at Yi Li's indifferent expression, the old fox who had been in the imperial court for decades suddenly realized that this wasn't the best choice. Moreover, it might lead to certain consequences that he did not want to face. Old Madame Yi was still high and mighty. She took in the expressions of everyone present. She thought of the servant's report that Prince Ding's carriage had personally sent her granddaughter to the gate. Although no one saw Prince Ding himself, they could basically confirm that it was Prince Ding who had personally sent Yi Li back. Looking at Yi Ying's bitter face, old Madame Yi was even more disappointed in this pampered granddaughter. Since Li and Prince Ding's marriage was arranged, Prince Li's behavior towards Ying became less and less caring. Of course, this could be due to Yi Ying's reputation during this period. But such an obvious change, even an old woman like her who rarely went out could detect it. Could it be that her smart and clever granddaughter didn't notice it at all? She didn't think about how to hold on to Prince Li, but still found trouble for her sisters. Could it be that she didn't understand that even if Li was not favored, she was still a daughter of the Yi family? In the future, she would also be of help to the Yi family. For the first time, old Madame Yi doubted whether it was a mistake to exchange Yi Ying for Yi Li and Prince Li's marriage. Enough. Ying Li is your elder sister. Pay attention to your propriety as a younger sister. Old Madame Yi said. Yi Ying was stunned. She couldn't believe that old Madame Yi would actually speak up for Yi Li. Her eyes reddened as she felt wronged. She bit her red lips and said, but grandmother, how could she embarrass Prince Li in public? This makes Ying, Pa. Old Madame Yi slammed the table heavily and said coldly, embarrass Prince Li. Prince Li made things difficult for Li in front of so many people. Why didn't he think of embarrassing the Yi family? Or does he think that the Yi family can only have Prince Li? Old Madame Yi looked with some disappointment at Yi Ying, who still wanted to say something. For a man, she completely disregarded the family's reputation and interests. Could such a granddaughter really be expected to bring any benefits to the Yi family in the future? She was afraid that one day, she would sell the Yi family for Prince Li. Or did she think that it would be better if Li's reputation was ruined? One's glory, one's loss, all's loss. She didn't even understand what Wang Shi had taught her all these years. Her cold gaze swept across Wang Shi. Wang Shi couldn't help but shrink back, not daring to meet old Madame Ye's gaze directly. Father, Minister Yi frowned with some headache. He was also somewhat dissatisfied with Mo Jingli. He could pretend that he didn't know that Prince Li wanted to make things difficult for Li, but that had to be done in private. By making things difficult and ridiculing openly, he wasn't slapping Yi Li's face. He was trampling on the Yi family's face. If it wasn't for the second daughter in the palace and the little grandson that was about to be born, so what if he was the emperor's younger brother? How could he tolerate it like this? Your grandmother is right. Even if you become Princess Li, you are still the daughter of the Yi family. Do you think that without the support of the Yi family and your second sister, you can stand firm in Princess Li? No matter if it's your second sister, or your eldest sister, third sister, fifth sister, or sixth sister, as long as you sisters are harmonious and support each other, no one can bully you in the future. Do you understand? But third sister offended not only Prince Li, but also Princess Xixia. Maybe even Princess Royal will blame us. Yi Ying looked at Yi Li with some unwillingness. She didn't hear what Minister Yi said at all. In Yi Ying's heart, other than her second sister in the palace, the other daughters of the Yi family were not worthy of being compared to her. She was the future Princess Li, why would she need their support? Yi Li looked up and said softly, "Fourth sister, don't worry. When I came back, I already had someone send a letter of apology and gifts to Princess Royal's residence. Prince Ding's residence will also send someone to explain to Princess Royal. Princess Royal is magnanimous and righteous. I don't think she will blame us, the younger generation, for such a small matter." Of course, at the same time, Qin's residence, Murong's residence, and Duquo's residence also went to apologize. Hearing this, old Madame Yi showed an appreciative smile and said, "Li handled this matter very well. Since it was in public and Princess Xixia was at fault first, Princess Royal has always been able to distinguish right from wrong and won't argue with the younger generation. His Highness Prince Ding is also considerate. When he returns, he will send a gift to the Prince Ding mansion, saying that he is thanking Prince Ding for personally sending Li back. Let Li handle it herself. If you want to send something, just go to the storeroom and get it." After hesitating for a moment, old Madame Yi still handed this matter to Yi Li. She was really worried about Madame Wang. Although the Yi family didn't need to curry favor with Prince Ding's residence, they couldn't make their relationship worse. Chapter 37. Li understands. "Please don't worry, grandmother." Yi Li stood up and responded. Wang Shi's face was a little pale. It was the responsibility of the mistress of the house to maintain relationships. If it was in Yi Li's personal name, it would be fine. But in the name of the Yi family, she asked Yi Li to do it. It was clearly embarrassing her as the mistress of the house. Old Madame Yi did not give her a chance to speak. She frowned and said, "If you have time, you might as well take care of Her's dowry. Don't forget that there are not many days left before the wedding." "Yes." Wang Shi responded timidly. "Master, old Madame Ye's nanny hurried in." She deliberately looked at Yi Li before walking to old Madame Yi and said, "Old Madame, young Master Su and the second, third, fourth, and fifth young masters of the Su family are here to visit." "What?" Minister Yi was so shocked that he jumped out of his chair. The young masters of the Su family came to visit at the same time. Didn't that mean that his troublesome brother-in-law had also arrived in the capital? Of course, with Master Su's pride, he would never personally visit the Yi family who killed his only baby sister. Old Madame Yi reacted quickly and said, "Quick, invite the young Master Su in." Yi Li was also a little surprised. She did not know that her uncle and cousin had arrived in the capital and did not go to greet them. This made Yi Li feel a little guilty. When her uncle was still in the capital, he doted on her the most. After not seeing him for so many years, even Yi Li did not know what to do. "Grandmother, Li will go and greet them personally." Old Madam Yi nodded and said, "Go." Shan, Lin, go too. She ignored Yi Lin and Yi Shan's surprise and Yi Ying's dissatisfaction. She also did not care what old Madam Yi was thinking. Yi Li got up and walked out quickly. Yi Lin and Yi Shan behind her also quickly followed. Only Yi Ying was left looking at Minister Yi unwillingly. She was the future Princess Li. Why should she go and greet Yi Li's cousin? Minister Yi had a headache. This daughter of his was really spoiled too much. Seeing Minister Ye's expression, Yi Ying knew that her father was really angry. She had to bite her lips and turn around to follow Yi Li and others. Before Er's wedding, let her come to Rongla Hall every day to serve me, her grandmother. Old Madam Yi looked at Wang Shi and said coldly. This daughter-in-law still has many things to tell I'm afraid. Wang Shi said uneasily. You teach? Look at what you've taught them all these years. Old Madam Yi said coldly. They don't know when to advance or retreat. Just because she had some talent and looks, she didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. These are nothing in the boudoir, but once you get married, you will have to take charge of a manor. Can those poems, songs, dances, and schemes that you taught be enough to support the Li Palace's reputation? Minister Yi nodded and said, Mother is right. Zhao Nyang was personally taught by her mother. It is Er's fortune that mother is able to give her some advice. Seeing that her husband had agreed without hesitation with an irrefutable expression, Wang Shi could only helplessly endure it. Recently, those little bitches have been restless, especially that concubine Mother Zhao. She didn't have time to care about Er's matters. At the gate of the Yi mansion, two handsome youths came down from the carriage. The youth in front glanced at the housekeeper waiting at the gate of the Yi mansion and a trace of dissatisfaction flashed in his eyes. He clicked his tongue and smiled at the people in the carriage. It seems that Big Brother's face is not enough. No one came to pick us up. The youth who came down behind him and was 2 years older glanced at him and said, Did Big Brother let you come to show off? The youth didn't care and made a face at his brother. Who cares? I'm here to see Sister Li Su Qingyan, pay attention to your etiquette. Someone in the carriage said lightly. Su Qingyan blinked at his brother and complained in a low voice, Second brother is fiercer than Big Brother. Su Qingbai rolled his eyes at him. If you know he's fierce, why do you keep provoking him? The head steward of the Yi residence looked awkwardly at the two young masters of the Su family who were talking to each other. These two young masters obviously treated his invitation to the young masters as a passing wind and had no intention of entering, not to mention the young masters who were still sitting in the carriage and had not even seen them. Just as he was hesitating whether or not to go forward and invite them, Yi Li's excited voice came from the gate behind him. Is it fourth cousin and fifth brother? Su Qingbai turned to look at the girl in green who came out quickly. His gaze changed from a bit of a stranger to a warm smile when Yi Li came closer. Li, I'm fourth brother. Do you remember me? Yi Li nodded slightly. Su Qingbai was the closest to her among the 5 children of the Su family. He was only 1 year older than her. So he was the closest to her when they were young. When she lived in the Su family, the two of them also studied and played together. Fourth brother. He, big sister Li, I'm Qingyan. Su Qingyan didn't want to be left behind and came forward. Yi Li looked at the handsome youth in front of her and smiled. Fifth brother has grown up. You really look like eldest aunt. That year when we left the capital, fifth brother was still a child. Su Qingyan's handsome face fell. Big sister Li bullied me. Big brother, second brother and cousin. Third brother. The curtain of the carriage behind them was lifted and Su Qingfeng jumped down from the carriage. Fortunately, Li still remembers third brother. Otherwise, third brother would be jealous. 2 young men came out of the carriage. They were the Su family's eldest son, known as the #1 scholar in the world, Su Qingchen, and the Su family's second son, Su Qingze. Li. Su Qingchen was dressed in white. When he saw Yi Li, his handsome face was dyed with a faint smile. Compared to Su Qingchen's handsome and elegant appearance, the 19-year-old Su Qingze had a more serious and solemn expression. He gave off a cold and distant feeling, but Yi Li could also feel the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her. "Big brother, second brother," Yi Li softly called out. She didn't know why, but her eyes were somewhat sour. A strange feeling of not knowing what to do surrounded Yi Li, who had always thought that she could handle it with ease. Even though there were many sisters in the Yi family, Yi Li had always felt that she was alone. But suddenly, there were so many brothers by her side. It was as if she had returned to the time when her mother hadn't passed away and her uncle and grandfather hadn't left the capital. It was as if she had returned to her previous life. Although there was no end to the fighting, it still made people feel warm. Su Qingchen raised his hand and stroked the hair by Yi Li's ear. He softly sighed and said, "Li has suffered these years." Yi Li repeatedly shook her head. Her throat seemed to be choked by something and she couldn't say a word. "Third sister, it's rude to let these cousins stand at the door. It's better to quickly invite them in." Yi Ying stepped forward and gently said to Yi Li. Then she gracefully bowed to Su Qingchen. Greets cousin Qingchen." Su Qingfeng rubbed his nose and stood behind his second brother. He had come to the Yi family many times, but the arrogant Yi Ying had never been so polite to him. Chapter 38. Yi Ying's expression changed slightly and she forced a smile. Yi Li quickly calmed down and smiled at Su Qingchen. "Li has been rude. Eldest brother, let's go in. Father and grandmother are waiting for cousins and fifth brother." Su Qingchen nodded. Beside him, Su Qingze waved his hand. The servants of the Su family waiting at the side took out the gifts they had brought from the carriage behind them and respectfully followed behind their master to the gate of the Yi residence. Yi Li followed beside Su Qingchen and Su Qingze and asked softly, "Eldest brother, how are eldest uncle and aunt?" Su Qingchen nodded and smiled. "Mother stayed in Yunzhou. Father is fine, he's just a little tired from the journey. He'll be fine after some rest." Eldest uncle and cousins came. Why didn't they tell Li so that Li could welcome them? Yi Li complained softly. Su Qingfeng, who was walking behind them, laughed and said, "You can't blame me. It was eldest uncle who sent a letter in advance and forbade anyone from receiving them. My father only found out when eldest uncle and eldest brother moved to another residence in the capital. He even threw a huge tantrum." Yi Li also knew that eldest uncle didn't like formalities and didn't mind. She smiled and said, "Then I'll go visit eldest uncle tomorrow. How are Mother Lin and Mother Wei?" "They're fine. Mother Lin and Mother Wei are the most loyal to aunt. Their families are also willing to follow you to the Ding residence. That's why grandfather let their families follow you," Su Qingze said. Yi Li nodded and didn't say anything polite. She felt even more guilty towards her grandfather. She had never been able to make him happy, yet she still had to make her grandfather worry about her at his age. Su Qingchen looked down at her and patted her shoulder lightly. "Don't think too much. As long as you're well, grandfather will be happy." "I know," Yi Li said. Yi Lin and Yi Shan watched as a few handsome men escorted Yi Li away. They then looked at Yi Ying, who had a gloomy expression on her face. After exchanging glances with each other, Yi Lin looked at Yi Ying and asked carefully, "Fourth elder sister, those people, are third elder sister's cousins?" Yi Ying raised her head and glared at her fiercely. Yi Lin could not help but take a step back when she saw the ruthless expression that she had never seen before. She almost bumped into Yi Shan behind her. Yi Ying sneered and looked at her with disdain. "You should give up now. What kind of family is the Su family? They won't take a fancy to you." After saying that, he didn't care about Yi Lin's expression and turned to follow her. Yi Lin was taken aback by Yi Ying's words. Her delicate face instantly turned red. Thinking of Yi Ying's meaning, he felt ashamed and embarrassed. Yi Shan looked at her and shook her head. "She's in a bad mood. Who asked you to provoke her? Let's go. Grandmother won't be happy if we're late. Yi Lin didn't expect Yi Shan, who always went her own way, to comfort her. Seeing that the others were almost out of sight, she quickly followed with Yi Shan. Rong Latang, greetings to old madam and uncle. Su Qingchen went forward to greet old Madam Yi and Minister Yi. Then the others followed. Old Madam Yi looked at the 5 men standing in the hall. Su Qingchen, who had been famous for a long time, was handsome and gentle. Even Su Qingyan, who was only 13 years old, was handsome and well-mannered. Even if she didn't want to admit it, she had to admit that the Su family was better at teaching children than the Yi family. Old Madam Ye's eyes flashed and she quickly smiled. We're all family. Let's dispense with the formalities. How's your father? Su Qingchen stood up and replied gracefully and calmly, Father is doing well. It's just that he's tired from the journey and couldn't come to visit you. Please forgive him. Although she knew he was just being polite, old Madam Yi couldn't say more. She just smiled and said, It's a tiring journey. You should have a good rest. Rong, come and greet your cousin. Yi Rong stood beside Wang Shi. He wanted to say something, but he saw his father staring at him sternly. Then he reluctantly went forward and said, Rong greets cousin. Yi Rong was not a scheming person. He didn't even do a good job on the surface. He didn't like Yi Li, naturally, he didn't like Yi Li's cousin. So even though he was warned by his father and grandmother before, he still couldn't completely hide his expression. Even when they were greeting each other, there was a hint of indifference and perfunctory in their actions. Minister Ye's face darkened again. Su Qingyan curled his lips and turned his head without saying anything. Anyway, he was the youngest. It wasn't his turn to speak. Su Qingchen acted as if he didn't see Yi Rong's expression. His smile was still warm and polite, and even a little bit more amiable. Yi is too polite. I heard that Ye's literary talent is quite good. Qingyan and Yi are the same age. Qingyan is very naughty. If you have nothing to do, you can walk around more. Su Qingyan was mad. Who wanted to walk around with him? But on the surface, he didn't dare to refute Su Qingchen at all. He obediently showed a friendly smile. Big brother, you're right. I must learn more from Yi. Su Qingchen was very satisfied with his brother's obedience. Later, he asked people to send gifts for Yi Rong and the Yi family. Yi Rong suddenly had a better impression of Su Qingchen. Compared with Su Qingfeng, who always picked on him, threatened him, and despised him, Su Qingchen, who didn't look down on him at all, was simply too likable. Su Qingyan, who was forced to make friends, quietly flashed to Su Qingbai's side. He secretly poked his arm, and then gave him a puzzled look. Why does big brother like this fool? Su Qingbai's eyes were upright and fair, because he's stupid enough. How could an idiot think that his big brother would really like the Yi family except for his cousin? The possibility was even lower than that his big brother wouldn't make things difficult for Prince Ding, okay? The young masters of the Su family, led by big brother Su Qingchen, had a cordial meeting with Minister Yi and old Madam Yi. As for Wang, who sat on the side and couldn't get a word in several times, she was deliberately ignored. The 5th young master of the Su family later said that he didn't like to talk to other people's concubines. That's right, in the eyes of the Su family, they had never recognized Wang's status as the legal wife. Not to mention the grudge between Wang and the late Madame Su, the Su family itself didn't recognize concubines as the legal wife. Of course, this might also have something to do with the fact that no one in the Su family took in a concubine, except for a few rare cases. If Wang was really a virtuous, and thrifty lady, they could still give a certain degree of respect. Unfortunately, Wang obviously didn't have these virtues. After that, Su Qingchen very tactfully and politely mentioned that his father missed his niece, who he hadn't seen for many years, and asked to take Yi Li to the Su family's residence for a while. Old Madam Yi naturally refused without thinking, and said that Yi Li was about to get married and needed to stay at home to wait for the wedding. Su Qingchen said that because his aunt died early, his grandfather was afraid that his cousin would be looked down upon by her husband's family after she got married. He especially asked his second aunt to invite the best housekeeping madams in the capital to teach her. He also sent a few nannies to teach his cousin etiquette. After all, it was said that the third daughter of the Yi family had no talent, no virtue, and no appearance. It could be seen that his cousin needed to be taught strictly, whether it was etiquette, bearing, or speaking. Chapter 39. Seeing old Madame Yi shut her mouth with a look of bitterness that she couldn't say. Yi Li was once again sure that when dealing with an old woman like old Madame Yi, she absolutely couldn't shed all pretense of cordiality and confront her with force. Seeing her own cousin speak so elegantly and courteously, who wouldn't believe that this was definitely a gentle and courteous junior respectfully listening to the elder's opinion? But looking at old Madame Yi's expression that definitely couldn't be called beautiful, could she really give any opinion? Even in the end, when old Madame Yi wanted Yi Shan and Yi Lin to accompany Yi Li to the Su family's side courtyard, her idea was rejected by Su Qingyan with a smile on his face, saying that men and women shouldn't be so close to each other. It would affect the reputation of the two young ladies. She could only helplessly watch as Yi Li was led out of the Yi family's main gate by the several young masters of the Su family. Once they left the Yi family, everyone was clearly much more relaxed and casual. Even Su Qingze, who always had a cold face, revealed a faint smile. The unfamiliarity between the siblings that had been separated for many years seemed to disappear in an instant. As for Su Qingyan, who was too young and didn't have an impression of Yi Li, he was very familiar with her. In a short while, they were intimate as if they had grown up together as siblings. Because the current head of the Su family, Su Qingchen, Su Qingbai, Su Qingyan's father, and Yi Li's uncle, Su Hongyu didn't want to be too conspicuous, so he didn't live in his younger brother's imperial censor manor. Instead, he directly lived in a small side courtyard of the Su family in the capital. Therefore, Yi Li and the others directly went to the Su family's side courtyard. "Uncle," seeing the middle-aged man in front of her, who was still elegant and gentle, Yi Li called out hoarsely. Su Hongyu also looked at this little niece that he had doted on since childhood. Seeing that face that was 70% similar to his sister who had passed away early and was a bit stronger than her sister, he couldn't help but sigh softly. He waved his hand at Yi Li and said, "Li, you've worked hard these years. Uncle knows about the matters in the capital. With Uncle around, let's see who still dares to make things difficult for you." Yi Li also felt that her eyes were somewhat sore. She forced a smile and said, "With second uncle around, who dares to make things difficult for Li? Li just misses uncle and grandfather." Su Hongyu glanced at his brother with some dissatisfaction and said, "If he was useful, would the mother and daughter of the Yi family be so smug?" Su Hongyan also knew his brother's temper. He could only helplessly smile bitterly and said, "Big brother is right. It's your younger brother who didn't take good care of Li. Uncle." Yi Li shook her uncle's arm unwillingly. She didn't feel any pressure to act coquettishly in front of her uncle. After all, she had been like this since she was young. Who asked her to be a real child at that time? Moreover, he was the only child in the entire Su family who was not afraid of first uncle. Su Hongyu lovingly rubbed the back of Yi Li's head and said with a smile, "All right, uncle was just saying. I haven't seen you for so many years, but you only care about your second uncle. That's not true. Li has always missed uncle and grandfather. Then when your grandfather wants you to go to Yunzhou, you still dare to refuse?" After chatting with her two uncles for a while, Su Hongyu had Su Qingyan bring her to the room that had already been prepared. At the same time, she could see the two mamas who had been waiting for a long time. Yi Li also knew that her uncle and cousin probably had something to talk about. She obediently followed Su Qingyan. Yi Li's room had already been prepared. It was in a quiet and secluded courtyard in the innermost part of the residence. The residence of the Su family, whether it was the imperial censor's residence or the former Su residence in the capital, was all simple and elegant. It also suited Yi Li's feelings very well. As soon as she stepped through the door, someone immediately came up to greet her. Miss. Two mamas dressed in plain clothes came up to greet her. When they saw Yi Li, they couldn't help but be stunned. Their eyes filled with hot tears. Mama Lin. Nanny. Yi Li called out. Mama Lin was a personal maid who had followed her mother since childhood. She was almost 50 years old this year. Yi Li's nanny was also a child of the Su family. She was also 40 years old this year. Yi Li still remembered that when she forcibly sent Mama Lin and Mama Wei back to the Su family, the two of them knelt in front of her and begged her. They would rather die than leave. Since then, until she met Qing Shuang, there had been no one she could trust around her. However, Yi Li didn't regret it. Because she was very clear that at that time, she had just recovered her memory and her mind was still in a mess. Moreover, her body was also very weak. It was impossible for her to protect these two people who were sincerely good to her. Miss. Miss. The two mamas quickly walked to Yi Li. Mama Lin said with tears in her eyes, Miss has finally grown up. You look so much like Miss. Wei Mama's feelings for Yi Li were even deeper. After all, she was the one who personally took care of Yi Li since she was young. Sob sob. I'm sorry, eldest Mississippi. I've left eldest Miss alone in the Yi residence for so many years. Fortunately, Miss is fine. Yi Li sighed in her heart. She was still a little clumsy to deal with such a situation. She could only persuade the two mamas clumsily. Su Qingyan looked at Yi Li's somewhat stiff appearance and secretly laughed. At the same time, he was sure that the Yi family had mistreated his cousin. Ahem. Mama Lin, Mama Wei, you will be with Sister Li in the future. It's not very soon. Why don't we go inside and talk slowly? After being reminded by Su Qingyan, the two mamas quickly wiped their faces and nodded repeatedly. Fifth young master is right. We were careless. Quick, miss, see if you like your room. If you don't like it, we can change it. Watching Yi Li being pulled away by the two mamas, Su Qingyan, who had been forgotten, was stunned for a moment. He rolled his eyes at the sky and turned to walk out. Yi Li was pulled into her room and received the enthusiasm of the two mamas. On the other side of the courtyard, the atmosphere in the study was somewhat cold. Su Hongyu sat behind the desk and looked at his younger brother. The smile on his lips made Su Qingfeng and Su Qingbai, who were hiding behind him, couldn't help but shiver. So, His Highness Prince Li thinks that Li is not worthy of him and turned to seduce the Yi family's fourth young Mississippi. And the Emperor thinks that Li's reputation of 3,000 to 5,000 gold and the shame of being abandoned by Prince Li can be used to humiliate Prince Ding? Everyone's lips couldn't help but twitch. Seduce. Eldest uncle, you are a great scholar. Can't you speak more elegantly? Su Hongyan nodded and said, it is indeed so. As if he still felt that the atmosphere in the study was not low enough, Su Qingchen, who was sitting at the lower end, had a smile that was even more graceful than his father's as he took out a letter from his sleeve and said, just earlier today, Li Wang publicly stated at Chu Xiang Pavilion that no matter how much Li Er tries to please the crowd, he will definitely not marry her. Shiver. Su Qingyan, who had just slipped in, inconspicuously moved behind his fourth brother. Su Hongyu took the letter and looked at it for a while. He didn't say anything for a long time. Just as Su Hongyan was about to speak with some worry, he heard Su Hongyu laugh and say, not bad. You are truly worthy of being my Su family's daughter. As he said this, he directly handed the letter to Su Hongyan. Su Hongyan's lips twitched as he tried not to laugh. He had always stayed in the capital. How could he not know that this niece of his was definitely not as elegant as she appeared to be on the surface? But to be this fierce was rare. She was probably really provoked by Prince Li. Chapter 40. Prince Ding was there. Su Hongyan folded the letter and put it in his sleeve, ignoring Su Qingyan, who was still waiting for him. He had to go back and study how to add more information to Prince Li. Sure enough, he was too idle to find trouble with Li Er. Li Er seemed to have talked with Prince Ding. They seemed to have reached some kind of agreement. Su Qingchen smiled faintly. Su Hongyu thought for a moment and waved his hand. Your grandfather thinks highly of Prince Ding. Li Er doesn't seem to be dissatisfied with the marriage. Qingchen, I'll leave the rest to you. Su Qingchen nodded and smiled. I understand. I've been away from the capital for many years and haven't seen Prince Ding for a long time. When Yili arrived at the Su family, she found out that Su Qingchen didn't just say that to brush off Madame Yi when he said that she needed to learn a lot of things. In fact, on the second day Yili stayed at the Su family's residence, second aunt personally asked Duchess Hua to teach her how to manage the household and how to interact with the nobles. In addition, an old maid from the palace taught Yili the etiquette and rules of the palace. Every afternoon, Su Hongyu would personally explain some strategies to Yili, and then Su Qingchen would teach her how to appreciate antiques and treasures. He would also give her a detailed breakdown of the various powers in the capital. Yili had always thought that she had lived longer than others, so she should have learned a lot. Now she knew that in the eyes of her uncles and cousins in the Su family, she was still far from being an excellent lady. Thus, Yili began to take all sorts of exams, just like how she did in her previous life. She strived to memorize as much knowledge as possible from her uncle's teachings within a short span of a month. Miss Qin is here. Yili was sitting in the pavilion playing chess with Su Qingbai. Su Qingyan was watching from the side. Qing Shuang came in to report. These days, not only was Yili forced to learn, but Qing Shuang and Qing Xia who came with her were also taught by Mother Lin. Although it had only been a short time, Qing Shuang had become much more mature than before. Su Qingyan's eyes lit up, and he said with a smile, My future second sister-in-law. Su Qingbai put down the chess piece and smiled at Yili. Since there are guests here, let's continue tomorrow. Yili was more than happy to oblige. Compared to Go, she actually preferred Chinese chess. From Yili's point of view, Go was a game that placed a lot of emphasis on feelings. It required a macro strategy, a silent strategy, and mutual infiltration. Chess, on the other hand, was much faster. Horses and spears could be swung, and weapons could be exchanged. In Yili's heart, it was still the same as it was in her previous life. She liked the feeling of pleasure even more. As Su Qingbai put down his pieces, Yili raised her head and smiled. I'm not good at playing Go. I'm afraid that fourth brother has already lost his patience, right? Su Qingbai stood up and shook his head with a smile. Compared to Xiao Wu, I'd rather play with you. Su Xiao Wu was the Su family's #1 Go addict, Go idiot. He was terrible at playing Go, but he was still obsessed with it. It was a pity that even the servants in the Su family disdained to play Go with him. Hearing Su Qingbai's words, Su Qingyan looked at Yili with a mournful expression. Yili couldn't help but twitch her mouth. She really didn't know if fourth brother was praising her or insulting her. Qin Zheng was quickly invited in, and Su Qingbai also took Su Qingyan out. Li Er, it seems like you're doing well in the Su family. Qin Zheng stood outside the pavilion and smiled at Yili. Yili's face was ashen as she pulled Qin Zheng in. I never knew that I still had so many things to learn. Qin Zheng covered her mouth and snickered. Aunt Yi passed away early, so you naturally have more to learn. Which one of us didn't grow up from elementary school? Moreover, you're not marrying into an ordinary family, but into the Ding royal estate. You can't blame Uncle Su and the rest for being so meticulous. Yili thought of the 2 military strategy books that she still had in her study and couldn't help but frown. Those who didn't know would think that she wasn't getting married but going to war. However, compared to the books that Mother Lin and the wet nurse brought, Yili wisely chose the more practical and interesting military strategy books. Let's not talk about this. Has my biological sister seen my second brother? Yili asked Qin Zheng with a smile. Qin Zheng was slightly surprised and glared at Yili before saying in a low voice, Eldest young master and second young master have both gone out. Yili sighed regretfully. That meant that she hadn't seen them. After thinking about it, she leaned over to Qin Zheng's side and laughed softly. It's okay, they will come back. Looking at her meaningful smile, Qin Zheng's face turned even redder. She was so angry that she reached out to pinch her. Yili hurriedly begged for mercy while dodging. Sister Qin, I was wrong. I know I was wrong, have mercy. Qin Zheng glared at her fiercely again before saying, You girl. Why didn't you feel anything when you saw Prince Ding that day? Yili's calm performance that day had left a deep impression on Qin Zheng. Qin Zheng compared her unsettled mood and couldn't help but feel depressed and uneasy. Yili touched her nose in embarrassment. How could she have the nerve to tell the young girl in front of her that she was already past the age of blushing when facing a handsome guy? Cough, about this, just be normal. It's nothing. It's everyone's first time meeting each other and no one is worse than the other. Yili persuaded. Qin Zheng angrily rolled her eyes at Yili. She finally understood that Yili, this weirdo, didn't understand the delicate and beautiful thoughts of a girl. Yili cried out, who doesn't understand? While Yili was living a busy and happy life in the Su family's residence, the Yi family and the Li Palace were in deep water. The matter of that day at Chu Xiang Pavilion spread through various channels in the capital. Of course, there were all kinds of conjectures from the masses. There were even people in the gambling houses who were betting on when Li Wang would abandon fourth young Miss Yi again. The news of Li Wang and Princess Xixia's affair also inexplicably spread. The Princess of Nanzhao and the Prince of Dechu State fell in love at first sight, but because of their respective identities, they separated. The princess's old love was hard to forget, but the lover who came from thousands of miles away already had another beauty in his arms. Such a sad love tragedy, it was almost written into a storybook and sung in the teahouses and wine shops. Because of this, Yi Ying found Mo Jingli to complain tearfully. It just so happened that Mo Jingli was in a terrible fix and the two parted on bad terms. As a result, the rumors became even more turbulent. Prince, Imperial Concubine Dowager invites you in. Mo Jingli stepped into the palace with a gloomy expression. The steward who had been waiting for a long time quickly came forward to report. Mo Jingli nodded. He was originally going to return to his own place, but he turned and walked toward Xian Zhao Grand Concubine's courtyard. Mu Fei. Xian Zhao Grand Concubine supported her forehead as she sat on the soft couch, her expression somewhat ugly. Seeing Mo Jingli come in, she forced out a smile and said, Li is here. Come and sit. Does Mu Fei have any orders? Mo Jingli walked to the seat below the Imperial Concubine and asked. The Imperial Concubine shook her head and said, Mu Fei just wants to ask you how things are going. Seeing that the wedding date is approaching, if something happens again, it will not look good for the emperor. Mo Jingli said in a deep voice, Mu Fei, don't worry. It's just some rumors, nothing will happen. Xian Zhao Grand Concubine frowned and said, originally, Mu Fei did not agree to you marrying Yi Ying. But seeing that she is Yi Zhaoyi's younger sister, I endured it. Now, things had become so unseemly. Can she still hold up the Li Palace's face in the future? Mo Jingli's cold eyes flashed with a trace of light and said respectfully, she is not sensible. In the future, I will have to trouble Mu Fei to teach her well. Xian Zhao Grand Concubine waved her hand and said with some annoyance, forget it. Since things have come to this, I can only do this. Go and tell Yi Ying that these days, I will be well behaved and wait for the wedding. Since I want to be the Li Palace's Wang Fei, I need to be praised as a Wang Fei. Especially, don't provoke her third sister. Chapter 41. Imperial Mother. The consort dowager sneered and looked at Mo Jingli helplessly, Li, you really made a mistake this time. Although Imperial Mother couldn't see through third young Miss Ye's depth, how could that girl really be a barren daughter like others say? Besides, even if she really is a barren daughter, as long as she isn't a fool, she is still more valuable than Yi Ying. I heard that the head of the Su family, Su Hongyu, and several other young masters have arrived in the capital. Now you should know how important Yi Li is to the Su family. Mo Jingli coldly snorted, no matter how old the Su family is, they have already withdrawn from the imperial court. Besides, that Yi Li has no virtue to speak of. She is unfit to be the princess consort of the Li Palace. The consort dowager sighed and nodded, forget it, as long as you know what you are doing. Mo Jingli didn't know that the recent days were just the beginning of his bad luck. Even if they had already withdrawn from the imperial court, the power of the aristocratic families that had spanned across 2 dynasties for hundreds of years was not something a mere prince could resist. Ding Kingdom Residence, Prince, 3rd young Master Feng is here. Hearing the guard's report, Mo Xiaoyao put down the brush he was painting and frowned, let him in. After a while, Feng Xiao appeared at the door of the study, looking like a hedonistic son of rich parents. He said with a grin, the wedding is near and you can still sit still. Mo Xiaoyao didn't look at him and said indifferently, what are you doing here? It won't be good to let people know that you are in contact with me. Feng Xiao helplessly shrugged. I didn't want to come. Someone wants to see you. The threshold of your Ding Kingdom residence is too high, so they came to find me. Mo Xiaoyao stopped painting and pondered for a moment before raising his head. Su Qingchen. Prince Ding is well informed. You really live up to your reputation. Someone outside the door laughed. Su Qingchen, dressed in white, gracefully walked in. The study suddenly accommodated 3 outstanding men with their own characteristics, making it seem a little crowded in an instant. Mo Xiaoyao looked at Su Qingchen in silence for a moment, then sighed and said, thank you for your hard work, great Mr. Su. Su Qingchen nodded in satisfaction and said, there's no need for that. Even if it wasn't you, if it was someone else, father would still personally come to the capital. You should know that Li is the only daughter of our Su family. Feng Xiao raised his eyebrows and found a place to sit as he looked at Mo Xiaoyao mockingly. Like he said, the future Ding Wang Fei's backing was very big. Su Qingchen clearly had no intention of being courteous. He walked over to an empty chair and sat down. Sizing up Mo Xiaoyao, he said, who would have thought that the #1 young general in the capital would become so cultured and refined? When Su Qingchen became famous, Mo Xiaoyao was also at the peak of his fame, so the two of them had some friendship. However, one was a martial artist, the other was a scholar. Their personalities were as different as heaven and earth, so they didn't have a deep friendship. Mo Xiaoyao lowered his eyes and smiled bitterly, is Brother Su rubbing salt on someone's wound by mentioning this? Su Qingchen raised his eyebrows and smiled, if Prince can't even accept the current situation, why should the Su family hand Li over to you? Furthermore, this one doesn't see that Prince feels hurt. Mo Xiaoyao raised his eyes carrying a faint indifference, if this one feels hurt, will Brother Su not mention it? Feng Xiao rolled his eyes at the 2 people in front of him, I say, do the 2 of you intend to keep talking about this meaningless nonsense? Su Qingchen smiled apologetically, all right, this one has been rude. However, I believe that Prince will forgive the feelings of an elder brother who is about to marry off his sister, right? Mo Xiaoyao could only smile bitterly, actually, Xiaoyao is more curious. Why would the Su family agree to marry Miss Yi into the Ding Wang Fu? Su Qingchen glanced at Feng Xiao. Feng Xiao smiled lazily at him. Su Qingchen understood that Feng Xiao was someone Mo Xiaoyao trusted. Although he didn't know why Mo Xiaoyao would trust a son of the Feng family who was obviously on the emperor's side, Su Qingchen didn't plan to get to the bottom of it, because the emperor won't give us the chance to freely choose. Li Wang wasn't a good choice in the first place. It just so happens that Li Er also doesn't like him. What's more, the emperor actually agreed to cancel the engagement. Then why didn't he agree? Although the emperor was meddlesome and bestowed a marriage to Li, compared to Li Wang, this one and my father still believe in Prince Ding more. Feng Xiao raised his eyebrows, Li Wang is the #1 candidate for husband in the hearts of the noble ladies in the capital. Su Qingchen didn't care at all, that doesn't change the fact that he's an idiot. Was Li Wang an idiot? Of course not. However, eldest young Master Su clearly didn't think so. Therefore, Feng Xiao could only throw him a ruthless look. Is the emperor still unable to tolerate the Su family? tying the Su family and the Ding Wang-fu together, then swallowing them in one gulp. Isn't his appetite too big? After a while, Mo Xiaoyao asked faintly. In the study, the temperature seemed to instantly become cold. Feng Zhiyao couldn't help but retract his unrestrained smile, frowning as he looked at Mo Xiaoyao. Huh. Prince has good eyesight. Su Qingchen smiled, his slender fingers lightly tapping the armrest, his actions still boundless elegance. The emperor probably thinks that the Su family and the Ding Wang-fu are no longer as powerful as they used to be. If we act separately, it's hard to avoid alerting the enemy. It's better to capture them all in one go. After all, the Su family is estranged from Mount Li, the #1 school in Dechu State. At least half of the officials in the imperial court came from Mount Li. How can you let the emperor, who has great talent and bold vision, rest assured? For some reason, Feng Zhiyao felt that the words great talent and bold vision coming out of Su Qingchen's mouth were more like sarcasm. Mo Xiaoyao nodded, saying, the Ding Wang-fu's vitality is indeed greatly damaged. No wonder the emperor is so confident. Su Qingchen smiled, this one doesn't think the emperor should have that much confidence. Otherwise, all these years, why would the Ding Wang-fu still exist? The Ding Wang-fu was definitely a thorn in the side of the emperor. Back then, when the Ding Wang-fu encountered a huge change, if it wasn't for the man in front of him withstanding his illness to turn the tide, the Ding Wang-fu would probably only exist in the memories of the people. Feng Zhiyao looked at the two equally cultured and refined men in front of him and couldn't help but shiver from the bottom of his heart. To turn the two families that he feared the most into in-laws, the emperor, do you really hate your own vast territory so much? I say, can the two of you discuss something that normal people can accept? He was only a hedonistic son, a hedonistic son. Why did they have to discuss something that could lead to the execution of the entire family in front of him? Su Qingchen nodded in agreement, very considerately changing his words, all right, I feel that there will be some changes in the marriage between Prince and Li. Of course, the Su family who is already far away from the capital is powerless to do anything about these matters. So I'll have to trouble Prince. Just take it as Prince's sincerity. Mo Xiaoyao nodded, many thanks for Brother Su's reminder. I know what to do. Su Qingchen stood up in satisfaction, saying, since that's the case, this one will take his leave. Let's chat again when there's time. Chapter 42. Mo Xiaoyao nodded. His fingers lightly tapped on the armrest of the wheelchair a few times. A brown-clothed youth appeared at the door. Prince. Send young Master Su out. Su Qingchen's handsome brows raised slightly. He didn't say anything else and followed the youth out. Only the two of them were left in the study. Feng Zhiyao looked at his good friend with a puzzled expression. Ah Yao, why do I feel that this Su Qingchen is different from the rumors? Are you, young Master Feng, the same inside and outside? Feng Zhiyao was speechless. Who in this world did not live with a few masks on their faces? What does Su Qingchen mean? Does that person in the palace really want to wipe out the Su family and the Ding royal estate in one fell swoop? Feng Zhiyao asked. The Su family is the head of the literati in Dechu State. The Ding royal estate has always held a large number of troops. They are indeed an eyesore to him. But there's no need to pull the two families together, right? Isn't he afraid that you guys will work together to pull him down from the top? Was he too confident or did the emperor himself have a hidden trump card? Mo Xiaoyao smiled faintly. The Su family won't rebel. He only needs to implicate the Su family when the Ding royal estate is unlucky. He is very clear in his heart that as long as Sir Qingyun is around, the Su family will definitely not betray the Dechu state. Even if they become in-laws, the Su family won't provide much help to the Ding royal estate. Feng Zhiyao shrugged his shoulders. He secretly thought that he didn't see that Su Qingchen as a subject who would pledge his loyalty to the emperor. Get someone to keep a close eye on Mo Jingli. Mo Xiaoyao picked up his brush again to finish the unfinished painting. Feng Zhiyao lazily fanned himself. Mo Jingli is very busy right now. Who do you think spread those rumors? When he first heard those rumors, Feng Zhiyao felt that Mo Jingli was so unlucky this year because he didn't burn incense properly. Mo Xiaoyao did not even raise his head. Su family, Murong family, Duhua family, Lu family, Censorate, Chu Xiang Pavilion, and Feng Zhiyao was speechless. Fine, he shouldn't have asked. After offending so many people, if Mo Jingli wasn't unlucky, then who would be? At the end of the 4th month, the Yi residence sent someone to bring Yi Li back to the Yi residence. Yi Ying's wedding was set to be held on the last day of April. It was said to be the only auspicious day in April. Su Hongyu calmly dismissed the people sent by the Yi family to pick up Yi Li. He only asked Su Qingbai and Su Qingyan to personally send Yi Li back the day before Yi Ying's wedding. Although Minister Yi was very unhappy, he did not say much due to his inexplicable fear of his brother-in-law. He only asked Yi Li to return to Qing Yixian to rest. When Yi Li went to the Su residence, she only brought 2 maids, Qing Shuang and Qing Xia. When she returned, she brought Mother Lin, Mother Wei, and more than a dozen people. There were also 2 maids, Qing Luan and Qing Yu, personally chosen by her grandfather. Qing Yixian, which was not big to begin with, seemed a little crowded. Mother Wei looked at the decorations of Qing Yixian and wiped her tears. How was this a place for a rich young lady? Yi Li did not mind. She only smiled and advised, no matter how gorgeous the decorations are, it will be taken advantage of by others when we leave. Mother Wei still did not agree. She only said that the young lady should not be wronged. Then she ordered the maids to redecorate Yi Li's room. Yi Li had no choice but to go. It seemed that everyone was dissatisfied with her room. Aunt also complained every time she came. Young miss, eldest young miss has come. The maid waiting outside the door reported. Yi Li put down the needle and thread in her hand. She raised her head and said with a smile, "Invite Shitsitsifei in." After a while, a beautiful woman dressed in palace clothing stepped into the room. Seeing Yi Li sitting at the table, she couldn't help but smile. "Third sister." Yi Li quickly rose to greetings to Shitsitsifei. This woman was the eldest young miss of the Yi residence, Nan Marquis Shitsitsifei Yizhen. Yizhen pulled her and said with a smile, "I don't dare. After third sister's wedding, I still have to give third sister a greeting. There are no outsiders now. Let's call each other sisters." Yi Li nodded and said with a smile, "Eldest sister, please sit." Yizhen's birth mother was a personal maid who had grown up with Minister Yi. When Yizhen was 5 years old, she died of illness. Yizhen was raised by Su Shi since she was young. When Su Shi passed away, Yizhen was already 13 years old. Because of this, Yi Li and Yizhen's relationship was not bad. When Yizhen was still at home, she would occasionally not take care of Yi Li. However, when she was not yet 15 years old, she was engaged by Wang Shi to be Nan Marquis Shitsitsifei. It was said that Nan Marquis Shitsi did not dote on Yizhen. After 7 or 8 years of marriage, they did not have a son or a daughter. Yizhen also rarely returned to the Yi family. The 2 sisters had not seen each other for nearly 2 years. This time, they came back to add to Yi Ying's dowry. Yizhen lightly touched the red brocade on the table. Her heart skipped a beat. "This is Phoenix brocade? Third sister is making a wedding dress?" Yi Li nodded. She was not too picky about wedding dresses. Therefore, she was not in a hurry to make one. Otherwise, she didn't know what to do with the Phoenix brocade that eldest uncle had specially brought over. After all, the Chu state's custom was that each woman could only have one wedding dress. It was very inauspicious to have another. Yizhen touched the soft red brocade in her hand with slight envy. She looked at Yi Li and said, "This wasn't prepared by Furen, right? I saw that fourth sister only used Mandarin duck brocade. I heard that it was bestowed by the Empress Dowager." Yi Li frowned slightly. She looked at the wedding dress in front of her with some hesitation. The Empress Dowager had bestowed Mandarin duck brocade to Yi Ying. If she used the more precious Phoenix brocade, the Empress Dowager's face would not look good. Yizhen had been the Shitsi for many years. She was not an ignorant person. She thought for a moment and said, "Phoenix brocade is a fabric used by the Dongling Kingdom's imperial family. Not only are the commoners unable to weave it, but it is also strictly forbidden to sell it. Originally, Dongling and Nanzhao would send some as gifts to our Dechu state's imperial family every year. However, it is said that when the late emperor was alive, the Dongling Kingdom's manufacturing process was accidentally lost. Third sister, this phoenix brocade should be one of the 2 bolts that the late emperor bestowed to the Su family when mother was born, right? Eldest sister has good eyesight. This was indeed sent to the capital by grandfather's eldest uncle." Yili nodded and said, "A wedding dress made of phoenix brocade was once the dream of all the noble young ladies in the capital. It was different from the gorgeous and dazzling Mandarin duck brocade. The phoenix brocade did not look conspicuous and was more like a bolt of red ordinary satin. However, when it was exposed to light, a lifelike phoenix design would appear. If one were to walk around while wearing it, it would give others the illusion of a phoenix fluttering in the air with one's movements. Generally, the best way to make it was to embroider a hibiscus or peony pattern on the phoenix brocade. When it was motionless, it would be a wedding dress with hibiscus flowers blooming and peony blooming. Once it was exposed to sunlight or light, the exquisite phoenix piercing the peony was enough to make anyone gasp in amazement. Yili had already made the veil on her head. She had already discovered to her surprise that under sunlight and light, even the intensity of the light would change the phoenix's color and shape. The craftsmanship of this world truly made Yili, who could be said to be experienced and knowledgeable, very surprised. Moreover, unlike the Mandarin duck brocade, which was rare but could still be found, the phoenix brocade was not only found in the Dechu state. It was likely that there were only a few bolts of phoenix brocade in every country. It could even be said that it was the loss of phoenix brocade that created the current reputation of Mandarin duck brocade in Nanzhao. Chapter 43. Since it was bestowed by the late emperor, it just so happens that the current emperor bestowed the marriage. Third sister wearing this dress can be said to bring out the best in each other. When the time comes, it will definitely amaze everyone in the capital." Yizhen said with a smile, a trace of joy quickly flashed through her eyes. She could imagine what kind of expression Wang Shi and Yi Ying would have when Yili wore such a dress to get married. Yili nodded and handed the unfinished wedding dress to Qing Luan, who was serving beside her. She smiled at Yizhen and said, "You are busy talking about me. I haven't seen you for a long time. How is eldest sister?" Yizhen narrowed her eyes and the smile on her face faded a little. She said, "What's wrong with me? Isn't it just living like this?" Yili had heard of the reputation of Marquis Nan's heir. Unfortunately, these things were not something she could control. Moreover, her relationship with Yizhen was not close enough for her to ask about her private matters. She could only say, "No matter what, you are the most important. If you don't care about yourself, who can care about you?" Yizhen was startled. She looked at Yi Li and said, "Third sister is right. These years, third sister has not had it easy. In the future, with the Su family around, third sister will not be more sad than at home." Yi Li smiled faintly. She stood up and said, "Has eldest sister gone to see fourth sister?" Yizhen shook her head and said, "I just went to greet grandmother. Fourth sister is busy choosing the new head ornaments. I did not want to disturb her." Yi Li smiled and said, "Then let's go together. Qing Xia, take out the set of Phoenix Sunrise head ornaments and send it to fourth sister." Qing Shuang said, "Young miss, isn't that the old madam's gift to you? And it was the most precious one. Fourth sister wanted it before, but the old madam did not give it to her. It would be a waste to give it to her now." Yi Li waved her hand and said, "I can't use that. If fourth sister likes it, then give it to her." Yi Li could only stay away from that set of graceful and precious ornaments. She had no doubt that if she really wore the whole set, her neck would hurt. In fact, Yi Ying would not really wear it. After all, she had always maintained a delicate and refined image. She was just angry that old Madame Yi gave it to her and not her. Yizhen carefully looked at the indifferent smile on Yi Li's face and sighed softly, "Among us sisters, third sister's temperament is still the best." Yi Li smiled and said, "It's not that I have a good temperament. In any case, we don't need to spend our entire lives together. Even if we can't, we only have a month left. It's so boring to fight over such trivial matters." Yizhen lowered her head and smiled. Fourth sister is right. When Yi Li and Yizhen arrived at Yi Ying's courtyard, Yi Ying and Wang Shi were choosing a dazzling array of ornaments on the table. Yi Ying was a little surprised to see the two of them walking in hand, but she quickly covered it up and got up to greet them with a smile. "Big sister, third sister, why are you here together?" Yizhen smiled and said, "I heard that fourth sister was busy, so I went to third sister's place first. It just so happens that third sister is coming over, so let's go together." Yi Ying smiled faintly and said, "Big sister, what are you talking about? What can Ying be busy with?" "Big sister, third sister, please take a seat." Yi Li followed behind the two of them and raised her eyebrows with interest. This was the first time she saw Yi Ying talking to her sisters without any arrogance. Especially when they were sisters born from concubines that she had always looked down on. It seemed that the old madame's methods were not to be underestimated. She could actually change Yi Ying so much in such a short time. Facing Yi Ying's warm and affectionate greeting, Yizhen was also a little uncomfortable. She looked at Yi Ying a few times before letting her pull her in and greeting Wang Shi, "Greetings, mother." "Madam." Yi Li bowed lightly. Wang Shi looked at Yi Li's indifferent and calm appearance and secretly gritted her teeth. Although she had been promoted as the legal wife for many years, Yi Li had never opened her mouth to teach her mother. Although she did not want Su's daughter to call her mother, Yi Li was the only legitimate daughter in the Yi residence. This kind of feeling always made Wang Shi feel that her title as the mistress of the household was not legitimate. She had once whispered pillow talk to the old master, but she did not know why. No matter how hard she tried, the old master had never insisted on this matter. He also never had the intention to force Yi Li to change the way she addressed her. "Mother, Ying wants to talk to big sister and third sister. If you have something to do, you can go ahead." Yi Ying pulled Wang Shi's hand and acted coquettishly. Wang Shi looked at her beautiful daughter dotingly and proudly, and her mood immediately improved. No matter what, she still won in the end, didn't she? Her daughter was a concubine in the palace, and the other was Prince Li's legal wife. Her son would be the master of the Yi family in the future. However, Lady Su had died early. Her biological daughter could only marry a crippled prince, and her adopted daughter could only be a concubine. "Alright, you two sisters should have a good chat. There are still some things to take care of. Mother will go out first." The three sisters stood up and sent Wang Shi out. Yi Ying immediately pulled Yizhen and Yi Li to sit down. She looked at them apologetically and said, "Big sister, third sister, Ying was not sensible in the past and neglected both of you. I hope that big sister will be magnanimous and not blaming her." Hearing this, Yizhen looked at Yi Li doubtfully. She smiled and said, "Fourth sister, you must be joking. We are sisters, so what's there to blame? Big sister still needs to rely on you in the future." Yi Ying smiled and said, "Grandmother is right. We are sisters, so naturally, we need to help each other. Big sister, don't say that you need to rely on us." Yi Li sat at the side and listened to the two chatting. She had a rough idea of what old Madame Yi and Yi Ying were talking about. But she was still surprised that Yi Ying would listen to old Madame Ye's teachings. Of course, she believed in another saying, "A leopard cannot change its spots." Even if Yi Ying really listened to old Madame Ye's teachings, it was impossible for her personality to change in such a short time. It seemed that something had happened these days that she was not aware of. Late at night, the minister's manor, which should have been quiet, was still brightly lit for tomorrow's wedding. Even the maidservants in Yi Li's Qing Yi pavilion were excited. After all, The marriage of the fourth Miss of the Qing Pavilion to the Li Palace was a joyous occasion. Everyone in the Qing Pavilion would be rewarded handsomely. Yi Li dismissed the servants beside her. As usual, she picked up the book that she had not finished reading and sat under the lamp to read. From time to time, she would pick up the pen and write. After an unknown amount of time, the noise that came from afar seemed to gradually fade away. Yi Li raised her hand and rubbed her eyebrows tiredly. Her body, which was leaning against the chair, slowly leaned to one side. Her calm eyes were tinged with sleepiness. Yi Li blinked her eyes. Finally, she could not resist the sleepiness and slowly closed her eyes. The cold room was silent. Only the occasional crackling of the lamp could be heard. After a long time, a black shadow flashed out of Qing Pavilion. It seemed that the person was very familiar with the layout of the manor. He easily avoided the guards in the manor, jumped over the wall of the backyard and disappeared into the dark night. In Qing Pavilion, there was no trace of the owner in the cold and elegant boudoir. Only an open book was left on the ground beside the desk. Chapter 44. In the outskirts of the capital. In the dark forest, a tall black figure was carrying a long object as he moved through the forest. He only stopped when he saw the tall figure standing not too far away. "You're late," the man in the shadows said in a deep voice. "No, you're the one who's early." The black-clothed man laughed, his voice sounding a bit lazy. He looked mockingly at the man whose face he couldn't see clearly. "I heard that the Yi family's fourth miss is the #1 beauty in the capital. I didn't think that you wouldn't be interested in the #1 beauty and would spend money to steal the third miss who has no talent and no looks. Or is this third miss the true beauty? I was in a hurry before and didn't get a good look. Now that I've seen it, it's not bad." As he said this, he put down the person on his shoulder and brushed away the hair on the sleeping girl's face. "Enough. You can leave." The man's voice sounded a bit angry as he coldly said. The black-clothed man shrugged and smiled. "Since it's like this, I wish you good luck." After he said this, he didn't delay and simply put the girl on the ground. He shrugged his shoulders and disappeared into the forest. The man in the shadows looked at the girl on the ground for a while before walking out of the shadows. Under the dim light of the night, a cold face vaguely appeared, staring fiercely at the girl on the ground. His originally handsome face was somewhat sinister under the dim light of the night. "Yi Li, don't blame me for being ruthless. If you want to blame someone, blame your bad luck. Even if it's something that I don't want, it's not Mo Xiaoyao's turn to pick it up." He bent down and reached out to grab the girl's collar. But the moment he touched her, he felt his vision go black and then a pain in his neck, causing him to fall down. The originally unconscious girl opened her eyes and pushed the person who looked like her backwards. As for the sound of something hitting the ground, she naturally ignored it. Yi Li slowly tidied up her clothes before looking at the man on the ground. Her expression was a bit disappointed. When she noticed that there was something wrong with the incense in the room, she thought that someone was trying to harm her. It turned out that it was Mo Jingli, and the reason was so stupid. Circling around Mo Jingli, Yi Li wondered for the first time if this Prince Li's brain had been spoiled by his brother, the Emperor. After thinking for a while, she decided not to waste any more effort. He leisurely took out a ball of inconspicuous silk thread from his sleeve and neatly tied up the person on the ground. Looking at the man who was tied up by her, Yi Li nodded with satisfaction. Don't be fooled by the fact that this ball of silk thread looked unremarkable. Regardless of whether it was in terms of hardness or toughness, it was very good. Unless Mo Jingli had the legendary profound internal energy, it would be impossible for a normal person to do this. As for her tying technique, Yi Li was even more assured. Unless Mo Jingli had the ability to shrink his bones, he could only wait for someone to save him. She just didn't know if Mo Jingli had brought any bodyguards with him to do this kind of sneaky thing. However, based on the current situation, it seemed that he didn't. Hopefully, he could make it in time for tomorrow's wedding. Yi Li irresponsibly thought. In the end, she still kicked the unconscious person to vent her anger. Then, she followed the path she remembered and walked towards the edge of the forest. Ah! Ah yow, what did I just see? After a long time, a stuttering voice sounded from the dark forest. 3 figures walked out from the forest. Feng Zhiao's image of an elegant young master was once again shattered. He stared dumbfoundedly at the unconscious man on the ground. Mo Xiaoyao looked at everything in front of him calmly and said, "It's just like what you just saw. This young master didn't sleep and ran out with you in the middle of the night because I was afraid something would happen to third Miss Yi. Now it seems that the one who would be in trouble is someone else, right?" If it wasn't for the fact that he still remembered his image, Feng Zhiao would have screamed like a woman. Look at what he just saw. After receiving the news that someone wanted to harm Yi Li, he crawled out of the beauty's bed in the middle of the night and hurried over. In the end, he saw Yi Li put Mo Jingli in a way that even he couldn't see clearly. Mo Jingli was a bit stupid, but he was still considered one of the top young talents in the capital, right? Walking to Mo Xiaoyao's side, he copied Yi Li's actions and circled around him. Feng Zhiao propped up his chin in boredom and asked, "What should we do now?" "Throw him into the pool over there," Mo Xiaoyao said without a frown. "That's a cold pool, he will die," Feng Zhiao advised without any sincerity. "Take off his clothes as well," Mo Xiaoyao said calmly. "I'm afraid that won't work. Your future princess is very skilled at tying people up." Feng Zhiao squatted on the ground and studied the knots on Mo Jingli's body. Yao, don't make third Miss Yi angry in the future. Women are too scary." After thinking for a long time, Feng Zhiao still couldn't think of how he would be able to escape without help if this kind of rope was tied on his body. However, this method is worth learning. Jean." "Yes, Prince." The youth standing behind Mo Xiaoyao and pushing the wheelchair responded. He went forward to grab the person on the ground and walked into the depths of the forest. After a while, there was a splash. Clearly, someone had been thrown into the water. Feng Zhiao couldn't help but stomp his feet. Yao, you'll teach the child the wrong things. What if Mo Jingli drowns?" A prince dying in the capital, and also the emperor's younger brother, was not a small matter. Mo Xiaoyao calmly looked at his hand on the armrest and said calmly, "Jean has always known propriety." Propriety? Did Jean have such a thing as propriety in his head? Feng Zhiao stomped his feet and ran over to see. He was speechless. Mo Jingli had been thrown into the pool. The area above his chest was still above the water. Most importantly, the rope that tied him up was obviously a lot longer, and the end of the rope was tied to a tree at the edge of the pool. This could ensure that Mo Jingli would not be accidentally brought to the center of the pool. He really knew propriety. Jean. I'll send your prince back. You stay here and watch. If it's too early, it'll wake up the person he brought. Don't drown him to death." Jean frowned. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Feng Zhiao looked at Mo Jingli sympathetically, then waved his fan in satisfaction as he walked in the direction of Mo Xiaoyao. Yao, I'm almost curious about your future princess." Feng Zhiao walked back into the forest. Mo Xiaoyao was still sitting in the shade of the trees. In the dark night, he didn't look very happy. No one knew what he was thinking. Mo Xiaoyao raised his head and said calmly, "It's time to go back." Feng Zhiao looked curiously at Mo Xiaoyao. "You're letting him go so easily?" Mo Xiaoyao had cultivated his character over the years and seemed to have a good temper. But Feng Zhiao knew very well that Mo Xiaoyao had never been a kind person. Mo Xiaoyao's gentle eyes flashed with coldness. "Tomorrow is Jingli's wedding. If something happens to the groom, it'll be too disappointing." Feng Zhiao wanted to sigh. "I thought you didn't want Mo Jingli to have anything to do with the Yi family. Don't forget, if he marries Yi Ying, you and he will be brother-in-law. Wasn't that an unpleasant relationship?" Mo Xiaoyao snorted. He exerted force and the wheelchair turned and headed out of the forest. Feng Jiao raised his brows, shrugged, and followed. He didn't know what interesting things would happen at the wedding tomorrow. It was best to get a good seat to watch the show.